Oh, we gotta start over now.
I think we're fine. You want to put it in the meeting minutes? We have done the pledge of allegiance.
Okay. You know what? I'm gonna abandon that and let's just go straight to some of the, let's go straight to one of the versions that, one of the more updated versions.
Not sure you mean that. You mean the stuff we have?
Yeah, you guys stay where you are and I'll just open up a more recent version.
Mhm.
So the line numbers are going to be a little bit different, so we'll have to go off of section numbers instead. So flipping back to wherever we have the form-based code start, let's see. About midway through the packet, and the first one is 35 pages long. So right after page 35, you'll have page 1 of the form base. Now, what I did,
I have 36 or so. I have 69 pages. Am I on the wrong thing?
no, you're in the right one if you've got 69.
I do.
So yeah, the first one is if you turn the page,
Oh, got it. Sorry,
35,
I was
35,
already
and
at
then-
okay.
so we're on one of 69.
Okay.
Let me get caught up. Sure, we're looking at the right thing. Okay, we are. Okay, so there shouldn't be anything in this version that you guys haven't seen except the highlighted version and the highlighted text. And except for last week, we did look at the highlighted text. So if you already read through that, then scratch that. But I wanted to go through the highlighted text just to make sure you guys are comfortable with that. And then if we wanted to, we can recap on anything else that you have learned about or seen or whatever that's in this.
You want to go through the whole thing first and then we can make notes if we want to come back.
Yeah, just the highlighted portions of it
Yep.
and then come back to others, unless you'd rather look at starting in a different way.
The only problem is that sometimes we get hung up on something and can't get through it all.
Yeah.
I'd love to go through it all and come back and touch on some things if we need to.
Okay,
You know, if you're good with that.
yeah, I'm just fine. So do you want to start just at the beginning and just go through, or
I don't know, you guys gonna start on page 2?
There we go.
Let's do it.
Page 2.
page 2? Okay. Any questions for me on page 2?
Are they doing transfer of necessary rights down in Toledo?
They will be, yeah, they're good. So that's actually one of the last pages. They're gonna do transfer incentives. So they're gonna do 1 for 3. Every one you transfer off of open space land, you get 3 in a village area. So that's what
This
we'll be
is
looking at.
where I feel like it's nerve-wracking to have everything together, because how do we make sure that that doesn't get then said, like, oh, it's in the documents, right? Well, it's in the documents for Western Weaver, it doesn't associate with Ogden Valley, and because we don't want bonus, right?
Right, that's exactly right. I'll show you
Okay.
that section specifically, because
So transfer instead of matching unit.
yeah, transfer instead of matching unit, that is a term that was already in the ordinance previous to now. So I put a note off to the side. I've got to go through the destination recreation resort zone, which
Mhm.
has its own transferable development right program built into it. And just make sure that we're not messing with anything specifically regarding the matching units and all that.
So with respect to that, for the resort zone, is when would that be discussed? Because, you know, in light, I think that was probably established prior to the state water
Mhm,
mandate situation, which kind of changes a lot of things.
it does, yeah. So that one was established, I want to say, just prior to Snow Basin getting entitled. So that would have been 2000, I want to say 10 or 11.
Okay,
I don't know that we've used a lot of that ordinance since then, except for to entitled Powder Mountain.
Mhm.
However, Powder Mountain didn't have to transfer anything. I think what we did was we were in a lawsuit and we settled with Powder Mountain for the amount of density that they ultimately got, as opposed to doing any transfers at that point.
So with respect to Snow Basin, given the current circumstances, what would be the outlook towards revisiting that situation now that the state has changed their stance on
Water.
water?
So Snow Basin, where they have a development agreement.
Right.
So at the time that they created the development agreement, they are vested in the ordinances that exist at the time. And where it's an agreement, it requires both sides to agree to make
Yeah.
changes. It's one of the things I like about not doing development agreements is we can make changes to the
Right.
ordinance and it applies to the property. Everything that hasn't already been established. Whereas development agreement kind of locks everything in place for a little while and you have to work with them as opposed to just being the government and telling people what to do kind of thing.
So you just said locks it in place for a little while. Is there a time
I
expiration on this?
think theirs is 30 years. Yeah.
Each development agreement is different depending on what they agree upon. Or I don't know, or is your standard 30 years? Or is it-
No, big projects. I really resist 30 years, but very big projects, we might agree to 30 years. I try hard just to make sure the ordinances get adopted the way they need to be adopted, but sometimes it's hard to avoid working through a development agreement. For example, Nordic Valley, theirs is 10 years with an automatic renewal of 5 years after that. It's a rolling renewal of 5 years, unless the county sends them notice that we're not going to renew. And we have to send them notice 12 months in advance. I do stuff like that so that we can say, all right, we know we have a definitive timeline and it's within our lifespan. As opposed to kicking it so far out that we can't make changes.
Powder.
I don't know, it might be about the same. I'm assuming that they probably Powder's been. Powder Mountain actually submitted their submittal when they go into the rezone was almost exactly the same as Snow Basins. I mean, it looked the same and everything. So I'd guess it's probably about the same. Okay, good question though. And Snow Basin will come back at some point in time and say, hey, we don't like this part of the agreement. And we'll say, well, you're stuck unless you change what we want you to change as well. And so it gives us the chance to negotiate with them. Okay, page 4. Or 3, excuse me.
Street type.
Yep, I just moved the street types up into the front. I pulled them out of the back and moved them to the front just to. If you're reading this like a novel, you kind of want to know what you're talking about before you get to the very end of it. Not that anybody reads it like a novel, but. Okay, 4, any questions on 4?
There's nobody highlighted.
Mm-mm. 5. Okay, so 4 and 5, just to make sure everyone's clear, we added a new street type. That's the MLLR. But that really doesn't affect you guys because MLLR isn't being used anywhere in the Ogden Valley right now.
Okay, wait, well, what does it stand for?
Sorry, medium large lot residential.
And it's not being used now, but so
be.
medium, large,
It's available for use, yes.
medium, large lot.
Yep, and a little bit later, we'll look at what that means. It basically means 12,500 square foot lot, quarter acre, basically.
Quarter acre.
So the medium large residential lot, just lower than that is 8,000 square feet. And you got the MLLR, which is 12,500, and then the large lot residential, which is what you guys already have in the valley, and that is the 20,000 square feet.
I'm noticing a type of one by 82.
82?
Yeah.
Large.
Oh, no, it's supposed to be like that.
Okay. It's Labarge.
The barge, like a barge.
Thank you for
You
catching
have
that.
your boat, you have your barge.
Got you.
Okay, so you'll see that MLLR street type reflected throughout. Okay, page 5 or page 6, any questions there?
I didn't see any changes on 5. Any changes on 5?
5 is just that new column.
Oh, the new column with
Of the
the
MLLR.
MLLR.
Yeah, sorry, folks online, I'm working from a paper copy, but trying to navigate the online copy as well. Oh, just so you guys are aware, I don't think this was in the previous, what you guys are looking at here. I'm removing mid-block alley from the street types. It's really not a street, it's an alley. So it's page over, it's actually gonna be in this section
Mid-block alley
here,
here.
mid-block alley. So I'm
Page
suggesting.
3, number 5.
I'm suggesting we move that to the end. We already put standards for mid-block alleys in there and it just fits better that way. It's
So
more,
you
of
just
a-
want to move it.
yeah, clerical change.
You're
Where
not
does that
changing
go
the
to, you
language.
said?
So it'll go, one of the last sections in the street regulating section
Okay,
discusses what a mid-block alley is, the frequency at which mid-block alleys need to be established, all that.
So you're not changing language, you're just moving it.
Yep, just move it. And once we get down to mid-block alley, I'll show you some of the changes that isn't in the packet that you're looking at,
Mhm.
that Western Weaver will be taking action on. And you guys can give me a knee-jerk reaction if it's something you don't like. Okay.
So we were 6. 7.
7, mostly just admin changes, organizing things so that they flow a little bit better and they're expandable going into the future. For example, section types. When we put the 030 at the end, that allows us to put a 031 or an 032 or whatever, just in the type of section.
Okay,
up in there.
that's 8. Okay.
Okay, 7 or 8,
Hopefully it changes.
not much. 9,
Mhm.
thanks, Doc. Fine.
10,
Maybe go 13.
11, 12. Oh, look at you. One ahead. All right. 13, 11, 12, 13. Just blow through it fast.
So 11, you got something on the book. Meat shop on, I don't know what section it is, it's kind of cut off.
Yep. Good call. So this is section 104-22, 3.06. So let me scroll down to that. So this is in food. So food, beverage, and other product sales for human consumption
Mhm.
section. And Western Weaver wanted to see butcher shops allowed to be a little bit bigger.
So this is maximum.
Yeah, maximum of 10,000 square feet.
Okay.
Do you guys have any concerns about that change? I don't know that we're
think
gonna
there
see,
would ever
a-
be anything that.
I'd be amazed. I mean,
10,000 square feet is a big butcher shop.
that's. Western Weaver seemed a little bit on the fence, but at the end of the day, they didn't seem. There was 1 or 2 people who said, let's allow more 10,000 and.
But
No-
again, it would have to
nobody
be in an
protested.
area where you could have a butcher shop
like an
anyways.
industrialized.
That's,
Yeah, it'd be
Well-
down by Peterson Builders or one of those areas that are.
so if you look at the where they're proposed in as permitted in government and institutional, vehicle oriented commercial, mixed use commercial, and multifamily residential.
So that could be an issue, I guess.
Wait,
So
I
could
only
that
see
be,
government and
could that designation be tacked down to
I
another
only see 2 pieces.
Next one.
designation?
Oh, gotcha.
Could that designation as a butcher shop be tacked on to, for example, a grocery store to expand the footprint of the grocery store?
Potentially, yeah, and actually, that's one of the ways that Nordic worked with us. They said, one of them says no more than well, let's just focus on 10,000, no more than 10,000 square feet can occupy any particular area. That used to say 10,000 square foot building.
Mhm.
Now, if you look further in, it actually talks about 10,000 square foot of area. So yeah, the grocery store could say, well, this is where Starbucks is. That's not the grocery store, that's Starbucks. This is where the pharmacy is. That's not the grocery store, that's the pharmacy. So yeah, there's a potential there. But I did want to talk to you guys about the grocery store when we get there.
Because that makes a pretty big building then.
That can make for a much
Which-
bigger building.
Again, would be, I think, a scale issue for the valley.
Mhm.
Yeah, so the 10,000 square feet, the butcher or other custom meat products. If it's the grocery store operating that butcher or the meat area, it wouldn't add on to what
It
they're,
wouldn't add on.
no, that would all just be part of the maximum square footage for the grocery store itself.
Okay,
Okay.
this is more of a standalone.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know why you need a 10,000 square foot butcher shop, but if you guys would like us to say in the Ogden Valley, 5,000, in the Western Weaver 10, we could do that.
No.
Well, I think it does set precedent by having big buildings, too many. If this building's allowed to be that big, then some other building that may not necessarily fit in at that scale, they may say, well, if you can have that.
Why not others?
This,
That's actually, so looking at up to, 2 rows, bakery, delicatessen or catering, small. 5,000 was just kind of the number we used to say small versus large. It's just based off of how much space is being occupied. And so when Western Weaver said, let's go to 10 for butcher or custom meat cutting, kind of resist a little bit, because if we do one, why aren't we doing it for the others?
That does make sense.
Yes.
This is the problem with being partnered with a place that has a lot of space.
Yes, yeah,
Right?
and
I mean-
actually, custom meat products, butcher and custom meat products is actually in the Ogden Valley Code, but it's not in the Western Weaver Code. So for them to even be looking at this
Oh,
is
interesting.
a little bit different. Yeah, there is actually an entity in the Liberty area that is a custom meat cutting entity. I'm so sorry. Oh, thank you.
I mean, if you have a 10,000 square foot building, I mean, you need more parking, you need just a big.
Yeah,
But
assuming you could fill it up and actually make it marketable.
sure,
Right,
Right,
Yeah,
and they still have to come, yeah.
I think 5,000 makes more sense.
okay,
You're taking for the butcher?
yep,
Yeah,
the more I think about it.
Works for me.
5,000 and OBPA. Okay,
So is that how you'll do it? You'll just say.
The reality is large butcher shop is still allowed. It's just not allowed in those 2 other zones.
that's exactly right. We're not stopping it from happening. We're just saying, if you're gonna be in a mixed use commercial, it's not be so huge that you're smelling fish upstairs in the residential units.
Because you can still do a large one. I'd say go back to 5 and then that's consistent with the bakery.
Okay, perfect. I think when Western Weavers plugs this into the map that they've been reviewing, I think they'll change their mind.
It'll make more sense to when you start seeing these zones.
That's right, that's right. Okay, good question. Okay. Nothing on 12?
Well, 12 that you're going to store, you said you want to talk there, or is that later?
Yeah, later.
Okay.
Yep. 13, any questions? Okay. Go to 14, and now we're on residential uses, so. I revised this so it doesn't get so clunky. Residential. So Western Weaver is concerned about allowing short-term rentals, much like a lot of the folks in the valley are. However, Western Weaver doesn't have as much of a drive market for short-term rentals. So far, they've said, we don't want them out here. Now, they're being asked to think about it again by the commissioners, just to see if they change their mind since the new plan has been adopted. But so far, what I've heard from them is, this is eating into affordability, and we don't think that's appropriate. There might be some streets in Western Weaver where it might be appropriate, maybe in a mixed-use commercial area or something like that. So the intention is that it doesn't change for the Ogden Valley, but it's being reorganized. So you kind of see what I'm going for and what you're looking at. But if you look at the screen here, short-term rental, I've just split it out, OVPA versus Western Weaver PA, planning area being the PA. Very similar to what you have in your packet. I just use it on the same line. And I'm proposing to do that every time there's a difference in uses, as well as in size standards. So now in the form-based code, we currently list short-term rentals as conditional uses. We forgot to change that when we adopted the short-term rental ordinance. So where short-term rentals are allowed inside of a mixed use, or excuse me, inside of a form-based area, they should be marked as Ps and not Cs, not conditional, just permitted. We've already put a ton of regulations on it.
So you're saying that they can just do it without getting a permit?
If they're inside of certain,
They have to get a license, right?
they do have to get a license.
Okay,
Yes,
but it's just allowed.
Is that a good idea?
And that's all form-based zones?
for the Ogden Valley, it's all form-based streets.
So we can't, I mean, we could technically change it, but.
Yeah, if you want to do a C here, I'd have to go back in. We might have to change a couple of sentences in the form, or excuse me, in the STR
Shouldn't
ordinance.
they all be a conditional permit?
Well, here's the challenge, and here's why we went with permitted instead of conditional.
I already see where this is going, but I want.
No, that's not fair.
So, what are the impacts of STRs? We've got a big list of the impacts of STRs. And we know it's garbage, it's partying, it's parking, it's pets, I mean, all kinds of stuff. And so we wrote probably, I can't remember what the final adopted version was, but 10 to 15 page ordinance just focused on dictating how STR should function and not function, and putting some pretty severe penalties on what happens if they violate. The intention of that was to take the subjectivity that can run with a conditional use permit and just turn it into straight objectivity. If you violate this, this is the same rule for everybody. It's not special rule for you, special rule for you, special rule for you.
And we have to approve every single one of them.
Yeah.
If
So
we get 300 of them, we gotta approve 300 of them.
So here's a question for you guys then. Instead, look at the street types. And are there street types where STRs maybe belong a little bit better than others?
I think parking is the most objective way to mitigate problems in
Mhm.
advance. So if there's no, if there's minimal parking,
Mhm.
that would tell me that you're gonna run into problems with your ordinance, and then you have to get into an enforcement mode.
Yep, that's
In
right.
your mixed use, multifamily or multifamily areas, what is your parking ratio required? I mean, just shooting from the hip.
For a residence, it's flat across the board, two cars per
2
residence.
to 1.
Yeah, however, if you're doing an STR, you have to provide sufficient parking that reflects your occupancy. I think it's one space. So there's special parking rules for STRs. I think it's one space per bedroom.
Yeah, that's where it becomes an issue, maybe.
Okay, and that starts to get into the weeds of it, but I still want to talk about STRs for form-based if it's automatic. And the big thing with passing the STR ordinance was that we were gonna have no new areas. Only the existing areas that currently allow STRs are gonna be allowed STRs, and then everybody that wants to within those areas has to get a license, right? That was the deal. But if we start allowing people to switch to form-based because they wanna do TDRs, or they wanna bank, or they wanna do whatever it is that's gonna come down the line, they automatically just added new areas for STRs, which is
Just by
against what we
rezoning. Yep.
just talked about doing with the ordinance.
So
Well, that's a big loophole.
not necessarily, because I think when the commissioners adopted the STR ordinance, they knew that it was allowed in the form-based areas.
Sure,
And so
but we
the-
can turn anything into a form-based area.
that's right. So that's one thing to be cautious about when we're doing form-based, is making sure it is a good area for STRs to go.
And that, in reality, a form-based area is the best place for them anyways, if you're gonna have them.
Sure. Think a little bit about that large lot subdivision that you guys will be seeing at the end of the month here. The
Which is right next to a whole private home neighborhood.
Sunnyfield.
Sunnyfield, yep, that one up there. Maybe STRs don't belong in that neighborhood.
Right, but it
So
comes automatically with the
you
form-based.
guys have the opportunity to say, put an end there for not approved.
What do the commissioners say? I just was curious what they talked about.
So they knew that it would be allowed in the form base as the form based ordinance gets adopted and applied to property and then expanded to more properties. They knew it would be in there. It was part of the discussion from the beginning, but I don't know that they really focused in, that wasn't any part of their motivation in adopting that ordinance. It's just short-term rentals was already listed in form base before they were dealing with the STR ordinance.
So should it go back to conditional so you can see where they go?
What if, well, so the issue with conditional is still, I mean, you can see it, you guys will see it, but you still have to approve it.
And it's still allowed.
Right.
There it is.
That's right.
You're not
So-
restricting it, you're just making them come in and bring it from the planning commission.
To take
Taking a big old pin right here.
Yep, take a look at what Western Weaver wants, just short-term rental ends across the board except for those first 5 areas. Short-term rental that is owner occupied ends across the board, again, except for those first 5. And you guys can choose to do that if you want to.
I'm not comfortable letting it be, because we'll start passing, like, which we've talked about in the past, form-based, because somebody wants to transfer in development rights, and that tends to be at least what I've thought we were mostly discussing and focusing on when we start are paying for base, and then you kind of forget about the fact that, oh, that
There's other uses
neighborhood
that
just
go with it.
became a short-term rental neighborhood.
I'm okay with what we have, but it's gonna be all we, because it's all gonna be one form.
Absolutely.
I wanna
I
say
mean, you might
too-
as well just approve short-term rentals everywhere, which
Well,
is
it's
what
all-
everybody fought against.
It's only in the areas with P though. You start getting into large lot residential, that's not permitted.
And,
But it's gonna be all we.
But- yeah,
I want to say too, though, that one of the points about this that it was brought up about the parking. We require at least 2 parking spaces for each short-term rental. Per the other conditions and ordinances. So if you don't have 2 dedicated parking spaces for each short-term rental, you don't get to have them. Regardless of what zone you're in.
But being in the valley, not a huge city, you're gonna need it anyways, right? I mean, if it's downtown Salt Lake, they're trying to get like a half a parking stall per unit,
Mhm.
and because they want people to walk.
Yeah.
Eden's not gonna be, you may walk around to Eden, but that's it, you know,
Mhm.
walking through.
Yeah.
Nordic got 1.5 per condo in their development agreement. So we even modified further what our parking requirements were for them. However, I've made sure it was very clear that they don't get to waive in their development agreement. They don't get to waive the parking requirements if it is a short-term rental. So just making sure
That
that
is, that is the area where you stay.
kind of belongs in that area, right?
Yeah.
As long as it's not creeping up the neighborhoods.
that I get. Yeah,
What's
that's,
wrong with approving
that's what I.
each one, I guess? What's wrong with that?
If you're doing it on case by case, first off, you're required to approve it unless, so the state code says a conditional use permit is a permitted use with conditions,
Right,
and they can't be denied unless they can't meet the
Right.
conditions.
Fire and life safety.
Right.
stuff like that.
parking,
That's right.
things like that.
That's right. So the way the STR ordinance was written, it was intended to capture every possible externality. So rather than having them go through a specific permitting process, it's just.
But through enforcement,
Mhm.
after the fact.
Yeah, it'd be through enforcement after the fact. That's right. So one of the issues, if it goes through the planning commission as a conditional use and the planning commission applies this rule for that guy and this rule for that guy, and we have a lot of them, that's gonna get almost unadministrable. We'd have to have a pretty big enforcement team. So we just try, part of regulating STRs is standardizing them so we could actually enforce as well.
Can you put a cap on SDR, say that you can have 500, that's it.
Yeah, they didn't. Yeah, so we actually talked about that. We talked about putting a cap and saying first 500, that's it.
Hmm.
One of the issues the commissioners had with that is they didn't want to pick winners and losers. So they didn't want to, well, anyway, they're already picking winners and losers on that STR front because you got some neighborhoods where it is allowed, some zones where it is allowed, and some zones where it's not allowed. So I don't want to get too hung up on this. I just want to, let me get your guys' gut reaction on this.
I'm uncomfortable.
Okay, well,
That's my gut.
hang on,
I'm uncomfortable.
let me ask a few more questions. Multifamily residential, would you be uncomfortable if on one of your multifamily, and turn back to your maps, if on one of your multifamily residential streets, the dark orange, you had STRs in there? Page 60 for Newtown Eden, and page 57, 58 for Old Town Eden.
So say that again, please.
So if you look at the dark orange areas on these maps, this is where multifamily is allowed. Would you be opposed to allowing short-term rentals in multifamily buildings?
No.
I hear one no.
Would be opposed to it, is that what you said?
Yeah, would you be opposed to allowing short-term rentals, either owner occupied or non-owner
Trying
occupied?
to make these trying to make this workforce or, you know, affordable, because if we start short-term renting, that's.
That's one of the reasons why the workforce provision is in there,
Is what,
is in here.
well, right, but that's the exact area we're talking about.
I don't disagree with you. So if they did STRs in a development, there still would need to be workforce units in that particular area as well.
Right, but the income coming in, I mean, just market.
Yep.
Demand, the income coming in of short-term rental is gonna out,
I don't disagree. It's a challenge. Is a silence, a rejection of the idea?
The small lot residential, I think, no.
3,000 square feet. You could have a single family, or you could have up to 4 single, 2, 3, or 4 family dwellings. So you could have condos or townhomes there up to 4 per lot. So you don't have, you don't have an issue, or you do have an issue?
Where do you draw the line?
It's.
I thought we had a purpose for that. I mean, that workforce housing, that affordable housing, and if we can, you know, quadruple our money by doing short-term rentals during a great ski year, then no one's gonna sell to the teacher or the fireman.
They're gonna be investment properties. If you.
Absolutely, 100%.
And there is a difference. So there are 2 lines we're looking at here. One is the short-term rental, and one is the short-term rental, comma, owner occupied or owner occupied short-term rental. There is a difference in the way that those behave.
What is owner occupied?
Yeah, what's an
Have to be on-site?
short-term rental?
So it doesn't mean on site, but owner occupied means that the owner of that building lives in that building most of the year. 7 months out of the year is how the tax assessor would.
Where they can say that's where they live.
Mhm.
Of the building. So if I own a condo building with 4 condos in it, I live in one for 7 months.
The one that you live in for 7 months out of that year, if you are renting that out for short-term rentals, that would be your owner.
Oh, that, it's not the whole
The,
building.
the other 3, yeah, would be
Okay.
non-owner occupied.
Okay,
We don't have to, we're gonna vote on this.
Right, this
At,
is
at
not-
the end of the month, yeah, I'm just trying to get straw
Okay.
poll here.
And you're gonna get,
I was gonna say, this one makes me think a little bit more, because I didn't
Yeah.
understand it when I read.
and there
through
will
it.
be a lot of public sentiment come forward on this
Very much
topic.
so,
for
yeah.
sure.
yeah, I'm circling it, I'm not.
Okay, we will circle it and not make any decisions.
I was gonna say, in my opinion, I know we're not supposed to have opinions, but in my.
No, you
opinion-
you can have opinions.
No, I'm just joking. Now,
What am I doing
In
here?
my opinion, it belongs in resort areas,
Mhm.
right?
Right.
Creek Resort.
Yep.
Snow Basin Resort.
Yep.
Nordic Valley
Mhm.
Resort.
Yeah.
Iron Resort,
I don't disagree.
because people are coming to use those facilities, they're gonna
Right.
stay there. they're gonna-
Yeah.
Even, Ogden Valley is not a resort.
The whole Ogden Valley, right?
The
Not
whole Ogden
supposed to
Valley.
be.
So you see what Western Weaver has done? They've said if it's short-term rental, you're only allowed in up to small lot residential. Now, Western Weaver still has a hard time with that. I don't even know if that's gonna get passed, because it's about 50-50 out there. And then for your owner occupied, yeah, it was about the same, actually, yep.
So I wasn't here when this was discussed in the context of form-based.
Mhm.
What was the direction for that? I mean, where did that come from to limit it to those form-based areas?
When we were to limit STRs to
Yes.
form-based, so STRs are limited to where they're currently
Yes,
allowed by
correct.
those laws.
Yep.
Yeah, and this, I guess the direction was, as these village areas, as they start to grow, they might make good areas for short-term rentals. You're gonna see hotels pop up in these areas, or motels or other lodging facilities pop up in these areas. So
Those are short-term rentals,
They-
essentially.
they are, yep, defined differently in our ordinance. That's how we define short-term a little bit different, but yeah, I almost think you leave them where they are and don't expand them into these areas here. I would suggest GNI, BOC and MUC and leaving it at that, like the Ogden Valley has proposed. Or excuse me, like Western
So
Weaver
up
has
to
proposed.
multifamily commercial,
It'd be mixed use commercial, but not in the multifamily,
I agree,
First 3 permitted, the rest no.
not.
because that's where you're gonna get your hotels and stuff anyways, right? Those-
Okay. Owner occupied, do you guys want to do anything different for that? Western Weaver did not.
So owner occupied could be any condo type building, big or small.
It's got to be a condo,
Yeah, one
one unit, yep,
in a multi-unit
Yep.
building.
big or small.
So that's basically saying you can have a short-term rental.
Wait.
on Any property. You should have a form-based zone.
In the form-based zone.
In the form-based zone, owner occupied is only for condos, or it's also all of this, all of the residential and whatnot?
Right.
It's only for condos or? is it
No, it's
also-
permitted all the way across.
Right, all the way across, that's
In
my point.
any, any dwelling type,
Yeah,
So in the Ogden Valley, it is currently permitted all the way across. So if you guys want to make that change, we can make that change here. And honestly, if you,
provided you're in a currently established short-term rental zone, this is changing the zone.
yes,
They have to go into the form-based zone for this. to
Right.
apply.
yeah. So my suggestion, if you guys are comfortable sticking with what Western Weaver called out,
Mhm.
just only allowing it in the GNI, BOC and MUC. And if we do that, I'll merge owner occupied and just short-term rental. I'll just merge them into the same use, because at that point, there's no point in splitting them out. You guys okay with that?
Seems reasonable. to
Okay.
me.
This has to go before a public hearing.
It does.
Before we vote on and everything.
It does. And one of the biggest issues with short-term rentals, obviously, is the neighborhood that it's in. If we're creating villages, maybe it'll be disruptive to the people who live there
Mhm.
right now, that's for sure, especially if it's folks on, 1 unit per 3 acres right there. As that area fills in, maybe we wait on even allowing any short-term rentals until we get more of these commercial type buildings with condos above. But
How are we allowed to do that?
you just say no until
But if it's in
sometime
the
future.
ordinance and if they're in a form base, you get to do it.
Right,
You
so
say
you
no
have to
now
say
in
no
the
now.
form-based village.
Oh,
It's
sorry, that,
modified.
okay,
It
I
gets
was-
modified later to allow them.
Yeah.
That I'm good with, saying no now and,
Yeah, you could say no.
okay, that I'm good with.
That's what the sign is gonna say in the public hearing.
Say
Say no now.
say no now. You can always say yes later, say no now. That's for me.
And in the public hearing, if you guys don't like the version that is pitched to you and just in general want to see something different, maybe I do come back with Ps in those first 3, and in the meeting, you guys all had a consensus that it just be no, and across the board. As long as all of the desired changes isn't pages long,
Mhm.
you guys can just make a motion that says, move to approve except for short-term rentals, make them all no. Grocery stores allow 40,000 instead of 30,000, you can do whatever you want to do at that point.
Sure.
Or table to another hearing if you wanted to. Okay, good. Page 6 of 69.
16, 6,
Sorry, guys, I got,
where are we?
sorry. 15. Anything on 15? Good, good. 17, 16 or 17.
This is all pretty basic stuff, right? I mean,
Yeah.
It seems like it's in line with everything in some of those areas.
I think so, but pay attention to the maps, pay attention to the colors, because if something comes online, maybe there is a particular type of shop, a dry cleaning shop or something like that comes online in a mixed use commercial where there is a residential building right next door. Making that transition is going to be hard to do for a lot of people who own and live right there. Now, when we created this, we did create it with a number of owners and business owners from at least the Old Town Eden area. And so they seem to be fairly comfortable. But it doesn't mean everyone is. And I remember Chris Hogue, who was on planning commission at that time, he lives right here. And when it got time to take action on the form-based plan, I think something clicked where he said, wait a second, I'm on one of those roads. So if the sentiment's going to be different once you start to implement it, especially if people aren't paying attention to it. I don't want to, what was it Nancy Pelosi said about the Affordable Care Act? We have to adopt it so we can read it. I don't want to do something like that. Just read it and then.
That's an interesting quote.
I don't know if that's what she said. Somebody told me she said that.
Okay.
Okay, outdoor storage, Western Weaver wants to have more discussions about that. They want places to put their toys outside somewhere, but I don't think that's gonna work in the Ogden Valley. We specifically changed outdoor storage because of issues that were happening in the Ogden Valley and pushed all the outdoor storage to far western over in the manufacturing areas. So we'll see what actually happens out of,
Is that one gonna be built over there we approved a while back? On the river?
that one's not outdoor, down by the river, that's all.
Oh, no, sorry, I was thinking indoor, but is that one moving forward, you know?
They have a development agreement that I think it expires after 5 years of adoption, but no, we haven't seen any building plans yet.
I haven't seen anything.
The same owner owns the units up on top, but
Yeah.
on the, yeah, in that village center, so I'm sure once he's all filled out and has more demand, he'll probably start in the other one. Okay.
Page.
Moving over to page 21. Unless somebody saw something before then.
We do not have a refueling station.
So on page 21, if we do end up regulating short-term rental and owner occupied and non-owner occupied together, then O goes away.
Sorry, real quick, page 19.
Okay, going back.
Your comments about conditionally allowed, is that for Western Weaver ordinance on the refueling station? Page 19, halfway up. Your comments off to the side said Western Weaver conditioning.
19, sorry.
Yeah.
Yes, yep, it showed as not allowed across
So
the
you
board.
split those then?
Yeah, so
Okay.
they want to see something different. In fact, I think I did split that.
But, where do you put an EV station if they're not allowed? That's refueling.
Oh, yeah.
Gas station or gas or refueling station, look at the second line down from the top on the table. So we do have vehicle oriented and government institutional streets is where they would be allowed.
And that's where an EV would go.
Yeah. Whatever fuel is needed for that particular type of vehicle. It's just truck or gas, truck gas or refueling station being treated differently just because a trucker stop is quite different than just a typical gas
Okay.
station.
Okay, that was good.
So no EV refueling of that for trucks.
Oh, that's it. So yeah, I guess that's true. I didn't even think about that. Guess they got to come up to the valley fully fueled.
Probably make
Huh. I do know the Maverick, they did build their canopies high enough to get a truck in there. But it's not common. You'll see one go.
I mean, we're a ways out, but it's probably coming.
Do you guys want to see some allowance, maybe in the vehicle oriented commercial areas? That's only in Newtown. There's no vehicle oriented commercial.
Peaceful.
I'm fine with this.
Yeah, why do it this way?
Okay. Yeah, you can see up on the screen, truck gas or refueling station. Split out by OVPA versus Western Weaver.
Okay.
Actually, I probably should put a conditional use on that one. Okay, perpetual building maintenance agreement, we just added in there other than single family dwellings and their accessory buildings.
I could see.
So yeah, it's actually page 148, or sorry, line 148 on page 19. If you look at on the screen, we're just suggesting a little bit extra language in there. That's not intended to apply to single family dwelling lots.
That's like mixed use multifamily, anything in
Yeah.
the street front that's
Yep.
close to the sidewalk.
That's right. And if you've got a fourplex in a small lot residential area, it would probably apply there as well. You just want to make sure that if you've got a 0 setback or less than a 10-foot setback, that there's the ability to maintain that side of the building.
And that's an agreement you would sign with the
Owner.
saying, take care of your property.
That's right.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that.
Okay. 20, I don't see any changes on 20. So I'm trying to follow along with the other hand.
21, you were saying about section O, short-term rental.
Yep. So yeah, if we do combine them together and it's just short-term rental, the owner occupied goes away.
Okay.
So that'll be nice and easy. Any questions on 22? Line 273, changing B to an A, we just a misreference section. Okay, page 23. Yeah. So this is where we're adding in the medium large lot residential, 12,500.
And that is gonna go for the Ogden Valley too.
It'll apply across the board to any street that is labeled the medium to large lot residential. Now, right now,
It was in all of our other color things, and he was saying we don't have it right now, but we could have it, and
Yep.
so it'll apply.
you could choose to have it, yep. Looking down at the table below part B on page 23. I just put a little, instead of having the asterisks off to the side, I'm just using footnotes
Okay.
on those. And the medium large lot residential, those will be 60 feet wide, minimum 60 feet wide.
It does make sense to go small and gradually grow out.
Yeah, and there was a perfect little slot right in there to put 60, 30, 50, 60. 60 is also, Western Weaver is working on a brand new ordinance, which you'll see in the other document we're looking at. That is a residential ordinance that allows 15,000 square foot lots. But they want to allow lot widths to go down to 60 feet and provide some flexible styling. So that's kind of why you see 60 there. Okay.
This also does help keep the density in those areas too.
Mhm.
By allowing a little bit smaller lots in those.
That's right. So something to think about, we're talking about the creep, the sprawl creep out of these villages. When you're looking at the maps, those bright greens, those are half acre lots on the periphery. One of the discussion points that we had was, do we create a new street type and call it medium large? Or do we just stick with medium and then large, but reduce large from 20,000 square feet down to 15? And one argument, I think it was Burton mentioned, well, you could fit more 15,000 square foot lots in there, which means you might eat more transferable development rights just in this area. 20,000, you wouldn't be able to get as many in there. So it really just comes down to, as this thing kind of goes outward, how do we want to make the transition from your urbanized area into your rural area?
Yeah, if the intent is to keep the density there, that makes sense to have that smaller lot size.
Mhm.
It's not sprawling the area out, it's just putting more density in there.
Right. So you could see a ring around Eden that is right now the 20,000 square foot lot size. It's just one ring around it, a street type. And then the next one in is 8,000 square feet. And then the next one in is 3,000 square feet. And the next one is multifamily and mixed use commercial.
But it doesn't it doesn't expand things out. It's just adding another line in within the area we already have.
That's right. That you could use or not use at some point in the
Right.
future if somebody asks for it. Okay, so this is actually, so line 278, this is something new that the Western Weaver is working on. If we're looking at lot sizes that are pretty narrow, they're concerned about just driving down the road and seeing only garage spaces. And so what they would like to see is some standard ratio of how much garage door can you have versus what is your lot width. And so the number that we came up with them was 15%. As I was punching those numbers in a little bit more based on different lot widths, I think it's better at 18%. So basically, your garage door cannot be any wider than 18% of what your lot width is. So if you had a 50,000 square, or sorry, a 50-foot wide lot, you would get 8 to 9 foot wide garage door that's front facing. Now you can have as many garage doors as you want facing a different direction. It's just what faces the street.
What if you have more than one door facing? Is that cumulative?
So I just revised it to say cumulative. So let's go there.
Yeah. Then you don't end up with next to it. Okay, well, there's a tiny little man door next to it. Right?
I didn't put cumulative in there.
And you're doing, instead of 15, it's 18? You said 18, but it says
8.
15.
It says 15, I'm suggesting 18,
Okay.
because you don't get a 2-car garage if you do 15, not
Right.
until you get up to 120-foot wide lots, which, you know, you got 8,000 square foot and 20,000 square foot. That,
Okay.
I don't know, it's just, I
No,
think you
that's fine.
want to make some exceptions there. Secure,
I was gonna say, on the smaller lots, you're not gonna get any garage.
not facing forward. That's right.
And you're not gonna be able to side entry on an 8,000 square foot lot for a house. Like
That's right. That's right. So what's the alternative?
Subterranean.
I guess that's true. It's rear load, alley load lots.
Which I'd be good with.
Mhm. And we do provide some provisions for alleys, in that case.
Yeah.
Yeah, so as you're driving down the public road, you don't see that this community celebrates their cars as much as other Western communities do. You just see houses and then they just go in through the back.
I can tell you that alleys in high dense snow areas don't work so well.
Yeah.
I've seen it. Where it doesn't work,
Really hard to
In-
plow.
really in fairly new expensive properties where. They're just hard, it's hard to get the snow out, nowhere to put it. Yeah.
One of the standards of alleys is it's got to be a minimum of 20 feet wide. Do you think that would help with that?
20 feet wide is barely 2 cars passing each
Yeah.
other.
I think in those cases, you're gonna see a 1-lane street with snow storage, one way.
It just has
I mean,
to be
that's an
done
alley.
with that in mind.
And the required snow storage area.
Okay, let's make sure we get that in
I
there.
think that's important because this doesn't make sense to truck snow out of here.
Well, it just won't happen, and then people won't be able to pass, and they'll have all sorts of.
We'd rather have enough room to store snow on our properties. Or.
I know.
I remember a few years ago, we were wondering if it ever was gonna snow again. It's second guess it. Okay, I'll make sure that gets in the alley section, which we still haven't looked at yet, so we'll get there. Next page over, page 25, unless there's more questions on 24. I love the highlight you see here. I'm just trying to, first off, in the commercial, so for commercial buildings, we were saying the minimum and maximum setback is from the front lot line. We should be using street on that, and we should have both. We should have a minimum maximum from the street versus minimum maximum from the front lot line. On commercial types of streets, commercial, multifamily, residential, government institutional, et cetera. There's the ability for people to get lots inside the block and get access to this. So you might have your outside block with storefronts and condos on top, and then you go to the inside of the block, and then maybe you've got multifamily in there, or maybe you've got other kinds of uses in there. So they don't require street frontage. You just have to have access to the internal block by an alley or by a other kind of road. In those cases, those blocks or those lots can have 0 setback. Just build right up to the property line. They still have to provide parking, some kind of shared parking plan with their neighbors, and access, snow storage, drainage, all that kind of stuff.
Sidewalk, basically.
Yeah, yes. Yeah, you'd have sidewalk, you'd also have, I'd say probably shared access agreements, a whole host of things to make that function for them. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to get approval because they have to have access to it. And so what this does is it says your lot line setback doesn't have a minimum, but you cannot build closer, or you have to, your measurement is from the street. Sorry, kind of all over the place tonight, but so basically, your minimum street setback is what we're looking at here. So no minimum for the government institutional, vehicle oriented commercial, mixed use commercial, or multifamily. And then you have a maximum setback. It's 5 feet or 20 feet of providing public dining or gathering space, and that's maximum from the street.
Does that match your street types that you have? So that's matching what your master plan and what the streets are gonna look like in all these villages.
It is, yeah. So there's a minute and a max, and we're basically saying your buildings can't be too far
Where does
back.
the street end? Is it the sidewalk?
The back of sidewalk.
Back of sidewalk.
Yeah, so in the graphics, you'll see the 14-foot sidewalk, and then the building is right there.
I
Mhm.
got you.
But then you've got, so that is for your first floor, street level, commercial building facade. That's when you've got those commercial buildings. For all other building facades, you still can't be any closer to the street than, in this case, 60 feet, because we're providing space for those commercial, first story commercial building facades to go there. So if you put in, let's say you're in the mixed use commercial area and you put in multifamily, you've got to have that setback 60 feet from the street in order to provide for that commercial space up front. But from your property line, you've got no maximum setback. Does that make sense? Fill the whole thing up. You just have to have all the parking and everything else that the code otherwise requires. Concerns, questions?
My just concerned because we deal with it on a daily basis is utilities. Has anybody thought through how much space we need for utilities?
Yeah, so in a number of these cases, the developer will have to work with the utility company to provide. The market's gonna govern on that as these developments unfold. Unless they're unfolding on a lot by lot basis, which I'm a little concerned is gonna happen, because there's so many different lot owners in these areas. But they wouldn't be able to develop if they didn't have access to utilities.
It's just the minimum or the maximum setback is, it can be a problem with utilities.
The 5 foot. So there, I see what you're saying. Yeah, we actually worked pretty hard with our engineering team and a few utility companies. The distance between the building front and the curb is very wide. And so you'll see most of your utilities in underneath that in utility vaults and
Okay, so we can,
it's kind of like you see out here.
okay, so you've got room for balls and
Mhm.
clearances between the two.
Yep.
Okay, all right, that makes sense. We're doing nothing right now, where it's a 5 foot setback on back of curves. Try to fill your utilities and that's why.
Yeah, challenge. Okay. Adding a provision under, so medium, large lot residential, just having the little superscript 3 right there. If you look it down in the note, the minimum may be reduced. So this is the minimum setback. Minimum setback on the medium to large lot residential may be reduced to 15 feet as long as the lot is rear or side loaded. In other words, and there's further restriction there, no parking area shall be provided within the 15 foot. That should say front setback. So basically,
Can't park a 20 foot front and 15 foot.
that's exactly right.
Okay.
And we don't want you to try. And so don't build a 15-foot sidewalk and then wait for someone to buy and they've got to try, right? Yeah, park in the back. Okay. The next table down, starting on line 313. When we first created the form-based code, we forgot to add in minimum setbacks for accessory buildings. So this just adds a column for accessory buildings.
Side lot line setback, so this is accessory buildings.
Mhm.
Does that become an issue? I mean, you're saying a minimum, minimum of 1 foot setback.
Mhm.
Is that from eve line? Or is that from basic building?
That can become an issue, yes. Now, I would say, I don't know what kind of air rights are actually owned, but I would say if somebody's eve is going over to my property, at the very least, their water's draining onto my property.
Or small sliding into your property or whatever.
And that's one of the reasons why it's 1 foot, because your water could potentially just hit right there on the property line. Now, snow, I don't think you're gonna prevent that, but unless you have a further setback. We stuck with the 1 foot because that's just what's standard in all of the other zones. We can do more if you want to.
I'm trying to create density down there, so I mean, it makes sense. 1 foot.
Okay. Okay. Page 27, any questions?
I was at, small lot residential percentage increased,
Where are we? There,
27, second table down. From 85 to 90%. maximum percent of lot coverage by buildings.
Mhm.
What was the point of that?
Remember, the Western Weaver did have a conversation about it. I don't remember what the out the door was, maybe just to give a little bit more area.
Again, to scale, I mean, if you're just covering up small areas with buildings,
It's a lot.
Mhm.
it's a lot.
Yeah, it is a lot. You want to stick with 85?
I mean, I,
Go to 80?
it just seems like that's a big footprint. If you're on a small piece of property and you're adjacent to another small piece of property, those are big footprints.
It is, yeah, so just to be
To where
clear
there's no big footprints
out there,
out there now.
Yeah. I agree. Small lot residential allows as small as 3,000 square feet, so you're right. Well, what is that math? Maybe it was the math wasn't working very well for them.
They wanted to get rid of the 5.
That's what I think. I think they just- Yeah,
Okay.
that's my first thought. It's like
Easier
50,
math.
30, 40, 90.
That may very well be what it was. Boy, sorry, this computer is so slow.
Small.
Yeah, what's 90% of 3,000?
Who's gonna get it first?
No.
90% of 3,000.
Yeah, I'm not gonna get it. 27?
It's not that big a deal.
So if you did that's what it was. They were concerned about being able to put 3 to 4 condos or townhomes on a 3,000 square foot lot. So they wanted a little bit more area than this. They still have to provide for drainage, parking, all that kind of stuff. So in this particular case, if you build that much and you are providing for drainage, you're gonna have underground parking. There's gonna be no option at that point. But, or
Or you
have
to
bigger
buy a
than
bigger
3,000
lot.
square feet.
Yeah, exactly. Buy a bigger lot. Things that you want to do.
Yep. Do you want to go back to 85?
85 is even big, but that's better than 90.
Well,
Yeah.
but we can change it to whatever we
Yeah.
want. You want 80? You want 70?
Do we hear 50?
That's what I said.
I mean, if you're driving down a road and you see, 5 of those in a row, then that's a crammed
Yeah,
area.
that particular road would be, let's go back and look at the maps just so we can put it into context. For where they are currently. You will, yep. So these are, in my mind, you'll probably see townhomes, just a fourplex townhome, 4x4 by 4plex is probably what you'll see in these areas.
So in the rest of the valley, what would that percentage be?
There isn't,
There isn't.
yeah, we don't currently have a coverage
Because you have
regulation.
setbacks.
Yeah, we do have the setbacks and all that, but
Be setbacks on these lots.
yeah, so the 3,000 square foot, we are actually looking at setbacks. So 3,000. Your rear is 5 feet for the main building. That's the table just above. And then your front is, you got no minimum for your front, so you could have it right up, let's see, is that right?
This is the small lot, not the medium lot.
Sorry, that's side lot line. Yep, small lot. So
Your
your
minimum.
Your
Is it
side is 0, And then your front is minimum 5 feet,
You said side is 5 feet?
but side is 0.
0.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, we could, so it's 4 and then another 4 right next door, right?
Mhm.
But so then you just have 8. And then 8, I mean, you could just have a row of houses there. Do you want to see a break in there?
To me, that seems reasonable in a setting like the Ogden Valley.
Okay, let me, and I think the Western, we would probably agree with you on that. So we'll go 5 feet side. That'd be 10 feet between buildings, or do you want to see? No, that's actually 10 feet between buildings. That gives pedestrians the ability to get back behind.
Then there's almost no room for a building there. A usable building.
Yeah, so they don't have to go as small as 3,000 square feet. It's just the lower limit.
oh,
So, and they could build single family in this zone. So they can have a 3,000 square foot with a single family on it if they wanted to. So a lot of different opportunities there, but I would assume that they're really gonna do a fourplex. They're gonna go a little bigger.
Right, a fourplex. I was like, you could do it, affordable home, like duplex.
Duplex would fit there. Mhm.
Just gonna be skinnier and taller.
I used to live in one of those shotgun houses. So So I'm like,
Did you live in a shotgun house?
yeah, for a couple of years.
So when I was in New Orleans, I toured the area and saw some of those shotgun houses. Kind of cool.
Okay,
Yeah, so this particular street type is intended to be a pretty dense street type, but maybe not an uninterrupted building street type. So we'll put a 5 feet in there, match the medium lot.
Yeah.
Okay,
Maybe in beach communities where, you know, land is more valuable than here, there's still room between
buildings.
buildings.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's staggered. You have 10 feet on one side, 5 on the other, so that as they line up.
Yep.
There is enough room,
Yeah,
you know.
and that is the exact standard that we'll look at in the other ordinance in just a minute. Okay, good. I like this. And I think Western Weaver would be fine with that too.
okay, that was 26, 27.
So 27, drop that down to 80.
Sure.
Okay. And I'll chat with Western Weaver to see how married they are to 90. If they're married, we can split
Split it.
it. Okay.
Okay, and then 29 is what we were talking last time. I have notes from last time.
Any questions on 28 before we turn to 29?
Maybe I'm noting.
Okay. Side. Rear, all right, let's go to height. Minimum main height, maximum main height, maximum accessory building height. Okay, so on the screen, let me do you guys a solid here. I can barely read that.
I drove by Old Town Eden with the specific conversation we had last time in mind, and I was surprised. I mean, I see it every single day, multiple times a day, and yet because of our conversation, I was like, well, they are really tall buildings for a 1 story, but they look good.
Yeah.
The way they are, but I wouldn't think to go higher. I don't know what that height is, but I wouldn't think to go higher than that.
I haven't gone out and measured, but I would, but you're talking about specifically the general store.
No, not the general store. The blacksmith and,
Okay.
yeah.
A lot of that height is facade.
It is facade, but it's still like that height. For being right up on the street,
For a 1-story building.
for a 1-story building, it is quite tall, but it looks good, so I think I feel like that, I wouldn't mess with that. This is,
Okay, good.
yeah,
So up on the screen, where we went from 50 to 40 on maximum height. Based on our conversation, tell me if I got this right. I am proposing we do 40 feet except 35 feet and no more than 2 stories for any part of a building within 30 feet of a public street.
what does that mean? 40 feet except 35 feet.
40, the maximum building height is 40 feet, except it cannot be taller than 35 feet. If it's within
Okay,
30
And no
feet
more
of
than
it.
2 stories.
And no more than 2 stories, yep.
okay.
So I
had
wanted
in
to
mind
make sure we.
35 feet, 2 stories is what I wrote down after our conversation.
That's what
2
he's,
stories, and then I can step back. and
he
go.
can step back and
Right.
go up 5 more,
Yep, well, 1 more, right?
5 more feet.
Oh.
5 more
I thought you
feet.
said
5 more.
5 more stories.
Okay, that's.
Scare everybody.
That's not street.
The street, it can only be 35 feet tall.
Yes, that's what I have in my
And
notes.
then as you step the building back, you
Yes.
can be up to a maximum of 40 feet.
Yes, that's what I remember.
So that would allow for essentially a 3-story building with a facade or a parapet.
Mhm. Yep.
Okay, and that's what that wording means.
So
Okay,
it's not gonna look like a big
right.
city.
Yeah.
You grow up there.
The massing of the streets is gonna be a lot lower.
Mhm.
Okay. Any other thoughts, questions, concerns? Okay,
What's a residential, 35 feet right now?
30, well, if you're in cluster, it's 40. But most of the cluster buildings we see have pitched roofs, and so it kind of takes away a little bit from the mass. If you saw a 40-foot tall flat roof residence, I think that would be reason to change the ordinance.
So you're saying Moose Hollow is 40 feet or less?
No,
That
If,
surprises me.
if it was built to that, that's just the maximum. I don't know what they were actually, how tall they actually are.
They've got to be 40 feet.
Yeah, because
The condo?
It's 3 stories plus a pitched roof.
Is that the CBR one zone? I don't think the CBR one zone had a specific height
Yeah, I
limitation.
may not have, I mean, they were built quite a while. so.
Yeah.
I just was curious, because those are tall buildings.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, those are tall.
but I have a flat roof in my home and
And lit up.
they do look. They have a tall feeling for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, vehicle oriented commercial on page 30. Did I skip anything on 29? Nope, it was height.
In the OBPA.
Yep, so this is maximum building or use footprint. So vehicle oriented commercial in the Ogden Valley, that's where the 30,000 square foot maximum allowed area for any given uses. Western Weaver, they said, we're not concerned. If Costco wants to come out, that's great. But
Please come out, I think is what you said.
yeah, I think that is what they said.
Okay.
But the Ogden Valley General Plan says we don't want big box stores, so
Mhm.
any kind of store bigger than 30,000 square feet should not be allowed.
Okay.
Boy, I've heard stories that the new grocery store is gonna be between 40 and 50,000 square feet.
What's the?
That's what they want.
Well, I was
That
gonna
is what
say-
they want.
I was gonna say that it's going to be
today-
when we have a.
It's proposed, but they still haven't proposed it to
Okay.
us.
Am I correct in that today it's about 16,000 square foot?
I think they're closer to 20-something thousand square feet, but
They
they're
want to double it.
below 30,000. Yeah,
Even with their additions and stuff, they're less than 30,000.
I can't remember. I know that at one time I put a polygon around the building and it was about 25 or so.
Would it,
but-
would it,
Up to 40,
40
is
to
what it
50.
says over here in the corner.
would it be the square footage be accurate on that county website?
Mhm. You want to check right now?
Yeah, because I thought I looked,
There you go.
maybe I looked at a different building.
33.
Is it really?
Which one?
The one in the green leaves is
33, and ours in the valley be 40?
40 to 50.
Well, I think they probably are trying to not.
Oh, 40 to 50.
Yeah, 40 to 50 is huge.
Now, again, I haven't had any conversations directly with
Mhm.
the store owner. They don't have even a commercial zone on that property right now, and so I think they're a little premature on making their site plans or determining how big their building's gonna go. I did have a conversation with commissioners yesterday about the possibility of this store coming in, because they brought something up, and I just mentioned to them that they should be aware that they don't have the zone. Nor do they have, if we do form base over there, the ability to get the size of building that they want over there. And so for them to be designing their site, they're a little premature on all of that. They should be negotiating what zone they're gonna get first off.
But if we go into Valley Market, it's small. Like,
Mhm.
there's, it needs to be bigger.
So let's have a look at what it is right now.
Yeah, you don't wanna cramp people to a smaller building when the need's there for a larger building, but you also don't wanna promote Walmart coming in either.
Right.
Mhm.
And we can always do like a one-off. You could say 30,000 for a grocery store, a locally owned grocery store. I don't know. what-
Can you do that?
Yeah, you could, I mean, it's gotta be legal.
You can say a locally owned.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, we could find a way to do that.
Could you change it? Like,
Courtney can
they're
do
gonna
that.
come and look, ask for a rezone, right? Is it like a development agreement? You could allow more than 30,000 in a development agreement?
Yep.
So
We could.
really,
Oh, okay.
so it's not really limiting them as long as they can get the zone they're asking for.
That's right.
And a development agreement for.
That's actually another really good way to look at that. So we could limit who we want to allow to have larger buildings based on what they're providing or,
Put it in.
whether or not they are local or whatever it is,
So-
just by approving an exception to the rule.
So you could leave it at 30,000. And then
Do a development.
on a case by case basis, it could be
Could.
up from there.
For a pharmacy, because I mean, everything's small.
Mhm.
It needs to be.
Well, there's no reason to build a
Jeff,
new one
this
if you're not gonna
computer
make
is so
it.
stinking
Yeah.
slow.
Why would you move?
Right,
You can't get
just
it.
stay where you
And
are.
I know it's not well, maybe it is looking at the potential for less than the potential for good success in the building. If people get in over their head, like I heard today that automobile repair facility in the valley's gone now
Yes,
because they
sure.
couldn't afford to operate there anymore.
I think that was more of a, they couldn't afford the lease that. kept-
Yeah.
or something like
Yeah,
that. They,
yeah.
I don't think they own the building, but
Right, but, you know, somebody builds twice as big as they need, they don't grow into it, and then they're gone.
Mhm. And
That's
then
not
we
a
had
good,
that.
that's not a good thing.
it's Kmart, but vacant Kmart.
Yeah, exactly.
I think if you can handle it on a case by case basis, that would be.
I think, yeah, and then maybe add 30,000 for the grocery store and an area for a pharmacy. And then a 10,000 square foot butcher shop, like you're saying.
Let's see. Is this a sidewalk right here on the side? Or is that
That's
Yeah,
the,
that's the delivery?
where they deliver, yeah.
So let's go, just gonna guess here. Here,
What's the average cost of having to do a developer agreement, like just rather than doing a?
for the landowner,
Yeah,
development agreement requires $10 more per acre. Or sorry, $5 more per acre, so the
oh, okay,
the fee to do a development. Fee to do a rezone is $600 plus $5 an acre. If it goes with the development agreement, it's $10 an acre.
oh, okay,
So it's not
so it's
huge.
not like a huge, yeah.
Okay, sorry, double click. About 20,
20.
and that's eaves. So yeah, you're probably right. You're probably, once you get inside, you're probably looking at a area that customers can use of less.
I
than
looked at
15.
the, what's it called, where the tax records are,
Okay,
it's 16, I thought, or something.
Probably look that back on. And then it would be across the street.
yeah, so again, it's, nothing's approved,
Right,
but
right, right.
this property right here is owned by Morgan Valley Foods. So, and that's,
Spring Valley Food.
and that's the entity that owns. No, never mind, but it's Terry Fields.
Yeah, but it's not, that little corner pocket.
This one here?
Yeah,
No, and that one is on commercial.
right.
I've had a few conversations with different people who want to put like a C store there, gas station or whatever, but
What, a C store?
convenience store.
Oh,
C store,
gotcha.
yeah.
It's really a weird.
I was thinking chocolate.
It's a weird shape. Yeah, to compete with Maverick, that's right. Maverick's got a monopoly over there, that's right. That's fighting words. Is that,
And then that other one, the one next to it, the square that cuts, would that go with it?
this guy right here?
Yes.
I'm not entirely certain.
Yeah, I think it does.
Okay.
Yep, looks like it's owned by
Okay.
the same.
And the one behind the grocery store,
Oh, okay, so they'll have the,
not that one,
no, the one next to the skinny one?
no, that current one there, I think. No, the one you were just pointing to, back behind the current store.
Oh, that,
Oh, yeah, look at that.
Yeah.
Huh, I didn't know that.
Who owns that?
isn't that the Powder
Grocery
Mountain
store.
Oh, do they?
No, Powder
parking
Mou-
lot?
no, Powder Mountains. Oh, yeah,
Like their overflow parking
I think at one
for the
point,
bus?
but it was just a lease. But then
Oh,
it
okay, it's
wasn't
not there.
owned. Yeah, that lease renewal, I
Okay.
can't remember if you guys approved that or not, but for them to,
No, it's-
they needed to renew their lease, and so they just wanted to make sure that they could continue to be there.
Interesting.
Okay, leave it
So
at 30.
development agreement.
Yep, great, good solution. Okay, 31, any requests for changes there? 32. Little peppered here and there, you'd see sidewalks, pathways, pedestrian stuff, and we're
So
just,
it's negative definition, what is fenestration?
it's window and door openings.
Fenestration means like slats, cuts.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Page 33. On 34, this is where you could see West Weaver stuff coming in.
And it's delineated as such.
Yeah, and they just like the style of Old Town Eden, of these buildings, so why don't we just start with that, and if we have someone who wants to do something different, we can evaluate it on
Mhm.
Are there buildings out there that look like this at all?
out west. agricultural buildings. Oh, flip the page over,
No, that, yeah.
those buildings.
Yeah.
Oh, I did have a question for you guys. Current ordinance, current design review code says white can only be used as an accent color, cannot be a predominant color. Any specific aversion to the color white? Can you-
Which, what? There's like 600.
Which shade of
Yeah.
white is a great question, and I've had that conversation with a few homeowners or landowners who
Okay,
are thinking, well, what if I just do eggshell?
right. Yeah.
I don't know what color white is.
So I've seen that in Truckee, right, where I lived in various areas, they were adverse to white, and I think it doesn't look good over time, I guess.
Okay.
Maybe requires more maintenance.
Doesn't age well. Got that big white barn up there.
We've got a few things, I think.
I mean, this would only apply to the commercial multifamily, commercial and multifamily buildings. It wouldn't apply to any single family.
I mean, you don't want to end up with a single tone color for an entire building.
Right. And so what do we have here? Muted earth tone colors are required. Let's see, do we have any other color requirements
I
That
mean,
language,
it'll
I've seen
shut
that
out.
language used
in other ordinances?
well in those types of places where aesthetics were important.
Yeah.
I've seen that exact language used.
Okay. Um. Design theme. Yeah, options on your roof line. Okay, building form, building massing, building material. Wall shall be finished with no less than 2 diverse types of material. So you might have 2 diverse types of material, all painted white. Do we want to say more than one color?
I don't know how you can.
We could just say more than one color.
You're putting a lot of restrictions on things if you. I hate tons of restrictions, but.
Yeah,
I think they're gonna paint it look nice.
I would hope if they're putting
Don't
money
you guys
into it
have
to do
kind
that.
of, I mean, planning department, they're gonna bring you a rendering of what they wanna do anyways, right?
Yeah.
And there's some conversation there and you can make recommendations that.
If it's adopted this way and they meet this, then it's got to be approved. Not a lot of flexibility there.
I think the point is to keep the view on the nature of the valley,
Mhm.
rather than make, the eye grabbing. A big bright white building or a bunch of them is gonna be pretty eye grabbing.
Yeah.
Park City's a prime example. You wouldn't see a completely
building.
white building in Park City because they don't allow it. They want natural materials and
Right.
stuff.
But which is
Earth tone.
what this says, right?
Yeah, so I had an attorney once say, what do you mean by earth tone? There are a lot of different colors that are earth tones. Now, I have written this and we should probably write this to say, in other versions of code, I've written this to say muted earth tones generally visible from the site. So,
Oh.
yeah,
If you look at the color photographs that you have in here, they're all multi-tone, earth
Yep.
tone, and I think if you can codify that.
Okay.
Monotone. May fit in some circumstances, but not in this type of construction.
okay, perfect.
You went up there now, you see a lot of white.
Yeah, yeah. Is it? If you're
Snow.
viewing the earth from
Yeah.
today's perspective, it's all gonna be white.
If they can find your house in the snow.
It's all right, wait till this weekend, it'll change.
Yeah, it'll be blue.
Does that mean you
And
can't
they
even
have
have a white door going into your?
No,
It's-
it says
it's
no
a-
more than 70%. I mean, are we taking that out?
Yeah, you're taking that out according to this.
It's allowed as an accent color. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a
Why take it out?
Western Weaver wanted the ability to get a little more white in there. They just weren't as comfortable with this, as strict of regulation.
No, I
So we
get
could just,
that, but
we
they're
could just split
also
it.
flat. Sorry, if I'm not mistaken. I don't really know, but.
Within view of site. Okay,
And I've also, and that's in context, and that we're seeing it written where you can't have white window treatments.
Hmm.
Again, that jump out
yeah,
and take away from the
It
Earth
calls
tone
the eye, yeah.
aesthetic.
okay.
I don't know if that ever ends up in any of the county.
Muted earth tones. And so at that point, I mean, how far muted of white does it need to be before it's acceptable?
HOAs to regulate that's inside the house.
All right,
Not what's inside.
Well, window treatments would be
Oh,
inside the house.
gotcha.
yeah,
Unless they're what?
They're visible from the outside, so that
Right.
was so
that was the idea,
the
yeah.
idea is not to have things that don't blend into the
Mhm.
general surroundings.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay, well, I'll change this, to say muted earth tone colors are required. Are you guys comfortable with at least 2 muted earth tone colors are required?
Sure.
Yeah.
That way it's not all one monotone color, at least 2. Okay, I think hopefully good performers obviously will be but the market's gonna help them design this a better way than just one monotonous building, but we don't write codes for good performers.
Isn't white an earth tone?
I don't.
Say it again, wait,
I think it is.
Isn't white an earth tone?
if you can see a part of the earth from the site, so when viewed from the site, if you could see white on the earth, so that snow wouldn't be
Not a
included in
cloud.
that.
White cloud.
No, that's in the sky, yeah.
White
yeah.
flowers.
You could potentially see flowers, so yeah, there's an argument to be made.
So would you say then that the muted earth tone colors are required, negates the need for outlawing 70% white because white is not an earth tone?
That, yeah, that's what I
Or
would,
is that up to interpretation on whether white is an earth tone?
Could say including, or you could reference both, couldn't you? Just to be
Yes.
clear.
yeah. Say no more than. Let's do that. Let's do both. And then in the Western Weaver, I'll say, so. In. Ogden Valley. Honestly. Looking at the agricultural styling of buildings, I kind of thought white would be preferred, white with kind of dark accents, dark windows or dark window
There are
frames.
a bunch in the valley. There was a couple of years ago, a bunch of homes went up that are white with black
Mhm.
accents or whatever, but
It's pretty trendy a couple years
it
ago.
is.
Now the black building is kind of the thing. I don't understand that,
But I go with the muted earth tones, because, I mean, you can do like vanilla and ecru and, you know, all this other stuff that's not bright white, right? I mean, because the bright whites is really gonna pull the attention away from, I think,
Yeah.
mostly, we're talking about commercial buildings, we kind of want to
Right.
keep the look
Right.
of the valley.
This is one of those delicate balances.
But
of
business owners
how-
want their business to be seen. I mean,
You don't have to be bright. You just have to be brighter than the guy next door. It's what Maverick
running
told me.
from there.
Yeah, that's right. Maverick said when we were talking about dark skies, they said, we don't have to be bright. We just have to be brighter than the gas station across the street.
Nailed that one.
Yeah, everywhere. Yeah, and believe it or not, that gas station up there is, unless they turn the lights up, is dark sky compliant.
It's
They
pretty
had
dark.
to switch them all
Mhm.
Pretty dark.
Of course, you look at this Maverick down here on 30th Street and
Yeah,
that is, you could see that from outer space. Okay, so I'll take out no more than 70%, or sorry, I'll leave in no more than 70% of the building's facade shall be white. Really, the question here comes in, how much regulation do you want to see? How much do we want the regulation to say, all right, here is your color code? You know, you can do this color code, or this color code, and we actually write it in. Or we say,
No.
ultra white. I mean, we know that there are paint codes that are called ultra white or pure white. We could always say those categories of white aren't allowed, or we just say no more than 70% of anything in particular is.
that.
Yeah,
That's not-
I think so too.
I'll leave it in there and I'll work with Western Weaver on that.
And then this one here, Nordic Valley Area Building Design Standards, this is just specific to,
Nordic.
then
Yeah,
they
and
go down to 30% of the building's facade should be bright. No more than,
Mhm. I do recall, yep.
and this is what, put into their developer agreement?
This is written into the ordinance, and then their development agreement has other details that are not specific to this here.
Including things that would contradict,
If they contradict, then the development agreement would fit.
right, okay,
But-
but this is for, I'm sorry, all of Nordic Valley, all the single family homes and everything, or just
Just the commercial,
just the form-based, because we're talking form-based, so
Yep.
just the mountain
that's right.
that we.
So in that form-based area, once you get to the single family,
Okay.
we haven't started regulating any of that. We can, it's designed in a way where you can start regulating that. I've just heard from upstairs that they'd rather have their hands off
Mhm.
on single
Okay.
family. Got it. Okay. Flipping over to, oh, sorry to everybody online. It's hard to post both types. Okay.
Powder Mountain is their own thing, right? Where they're not, we're not
doing-
trying to do form-based up there.
That's right, I'm not trying to do
It's their
anything.
own thing,
form-based up there.
okay.
If they ever want to do form-based, we can, I mean, they'd have to go through and create a whole street
Right.
regulating plan and everything, so a lot of opportunity to cut down on that. Okay.
I think that's something to share, I think.
Oh. How did that sharing?
Mhm.
All right, okay. So page 40, we mentioned this last time, I just didn't have the graphic to show it. Is just adding in a 3-lane village cross section. (42). This adds in a village cross section with cross slopes. Now that this village cross section with cross slopes was already used for Nordic Valley. But we described it with A, B, C, D, and E as opposed to illustrated it. So I'm just suggesting we illustrate and then take out the A, B, C, D, and E.
Sorry, say that again.
So on page 42, where we've got the village cross section with a cross slope, we're allowing a little bit narrower of the cross section there. When we approved Nordic Valley and this Nordic Valley specific changes, we just described what that meant with what's written in A, B, C, D, and E there.
483 to 488.
Just suggesting we change that to a graphic.
So on this cross section with the angled parking, is this like a industry standard,
Angled parking?
like the sizes and widths of the stuff?
Yeah. Yeah, 9 feet wide by 20 feet long is what they are.
As far as the parking's going,
Mhm.
but as far as angled parking, I mean, you put a 4-door long bed truck there, are you gonna still have 12 feet of travel lane? Because you're gonna have a lot of that up here.
Well, okay, so looking over at the image on the other, on 41, that's the typical village cross section. That's why we did 18 feet there,
Okay,
because I think down on the valley floor, we're gonna see a lot more of those trucks. The Nordic specific one is the 6.
this is Nordic specific.
Yeah, but it's specific because it's got the cross slope. I'm not, maybe once we get into Wolf Creek, maybe we'll be dealing with something like this as well, at which time we can adjust if necessary.
So we don't need to actually call it Nordic, we just call it village.
If it's got a
With a
cross
cross
slope,
slope,
yeah,
okay.
you can go down a little bit on that. Typical vehicle is like 5.5 feet wide. Excluding mirrors, you might get a little bit more. Semi is 8.5 feet wide. You get a little more when you have the mirrors on there. So when you look at a 12-foot wide travel surface, 12 feet is intended to accommodate pretty quick traffic. I could not get our engineers to come down from 12 feet here, mostly because when you get down to some of these village areas, you're gonna have RVs and boats and stuff like that. And, you know, even if they're going slow, it'd be nice to have extra space, but the engineers convinced me to stop pushing on reducing the 12-foot down to 11 or 10.
Mhm.
Because when you've got the pickup truck that it's got the long bed quad cab with the big hitch hanging out the back, that's gonna poke out a little bit into that 12 feet. even on the 18 foot standard. So the 12 feet gives a little bit of buffer there as well.
Okay.
And keep in mind, as you're looking at these, the current speed limit will have to be reduced. It can't stay
Yeah.
55 or whatever it is.
Oh, that'll be fun. Okay.
Okay. 489, line 489, page 42. Block alley design. So you guys have already seen most, if not all of this. Actually, I've got a little more on the screen here. However, I wanted to just walk you through it so it's clear. Mid-block alley, okay. So your minimum design cross-section is on the board right there. You're looking at, what is that, 34 feet? And it's basically a road. So a lot of times when people are talking about alleyways, if you go to some of some of these existing old mine town types of villages, you've got 12-foot wide alleys, and they just don't work very well. Our code says that an alley has to be a minimum of 20 feet wide. That's in the definition of an alley. I am suggesting we change that to say minimum of whatever the standard is in that, particular area, which in this case would be 34 feet, because you've got pedestrians and then you've got two 12-foot travel lanes, which is excessive for those travel lanes. But again, I couldn't, for some reason, get our engineers off of the 12-foot travel lane.
They're thinking fire trucks, they're thinking
That's exactly what they're
box
thinking.
vans.
Yep. And these are the primary accesses into the center of the blocks. And so it's basically a street. And if you look at the maps, let's flip back to, let's just look at Old Town. All those narrow lines. Oh, sorry, page 57. All of the lighter line weights that have a village color to them, so the red and the orange line weights inside of those blocks, those are all intended to be mid-block alleys, essentially. So these are basically roads. And then once they transition out of those blocks, out of those commercial or multifamily blocks, then they go into your small lot residential. And so a residential street type would need to pick up. So it would need to transition from a 34-foot wide right of way with 24 feet of travel surface to whatever the adopted residential cross section is at that point, which for most of this will be either 60 or 66 foot right of way with state code just changed. We can't require more than 32 feet of asphalt. So you'll see this transition into that.
More than 32 feet of asphalt width-wise.
Mhm.
And that's the width you're proposing.
Mhm. On residential streets, this particular one would not be residential. This would be an alleyway that serves multifamily. Some would say multifamily is residential. I should say in a single family residential area, we can't require more than 32 feet of asphalt. And they don't tell us how wide our right of way can be, but we know that ours is between 60 and 66. In some cases, we'll go as low as 50 if necessary, but most of the time the engineers want wider the better.
I think you have to figure every road or alleyway in a residential area in these areas will at some point have a boat maximum with boat trailer,
Mhm.
either parked or temporarily parked or
Mhm.
whatever,
Yeah,
and sometimes more than one. So I think that fact of life up there has to be taken into consideration for all
Yeah.
this.
Mhm.
once you get on these particular streets, well, technically, street parking isn't required or isn't allowed unless it's specifically provided for that zone. So in most of our areas, street parking isn't allowed. Doesn't mean that people don't do it,
Mhm.
and it also doesn't mean that we enforce it.
Right.
So here, definitely a trailer, a boat, or a vehicle, any of them wouldn't be allowed to park. So there would need to be other parking facilities for those kinds of vehicles. Our engineers did have some concerns about that as well. They said that even in these village areas, you're gonna have a hard time with your recreationalists finding a spot to park.
So we're gonna drive up this road with a 60-foot something behind, or maybe not 60, 40-foot trailer behind them, and they're gonna get stuck in this alleyway.
Potentially. Yeah, so
Or
that's,
move-ins and move-outs of multifamily are gonna be coming with a large box truck to
Yeah.
move their stuff into their unit.
so yeah, the box trucks, this would be fine for them, not for parking on the street, but for getting in and getting out again. A semi may not be able to do something like this. 12-foot wide travel lane can accommodate a semi, and so it really comes down at that point to what your radiuses are, your turning radiuses are getting in. But that's one of the reasons why we went with 34, where most communities have a much narrower alley standard. If you go up to Idaho Falls, they actually have, I want to say there's probably 15 to 20 feet wide, but then they also have side load dumpsters that they park in there. So the the garbage truck drives down a one-way alley with a side forks and then lifts it in and puts it back down again. And they just leave their dumpsters there. Really, the true definition of an alley that you think about in like New York City is kind of that kind of situation where the crime happens and stuff like that. These not intended to be that. These are access ways to get inside the block. But you're right. We do have a section also that says mid-block circulation needs to be provided for. So someone who proposes something that's inside of that block, they've got to show us that vehicles can get in and out.
Engineering is gonna be all over that.
Mhm.
And, yeah, emergency vehicles and
Yep.
egress.
Yep, egress and all that. And that's one of the reasons why we're looking at this kind of a width here. Yeah,
Mhm.
keep in mind, one of these blocks is the same dimension as the block that we're in right now,
Or is the same size.
same size. So the vast majority is intended to be on the exterior facing the public street, but most of what you're going to see on the interior, at least until the market takes off like crazy, if it ever happens, is just going to be parking areas on the inside. If you put a multifamily residential structure on the inside of a block, for example, think about behind this building, between here and the health department building and the crematorium up here. I mean, that's all parking. Somebody chose to put like a big multifamily that occupied a lot of that space. All of that parking would have to be offset for all the businesses and for that multifamily. And so you'd be talking about parking structures, maybe 2-3 stories deep to accommodate all that. So I don't see a ton of issues going on as far as circulation goes inside the block. The issue, well, in that respect, based on geometry, the issue that I see happening is landowners not wanting to work with each other. This is my parking lot. Nobody can use this parking lot. The Jimmy John story. Wait, did I tell you Jimmy John? Never mind. That was West Week. I told. Anyway, there's a Jimmy John's in Salt Lake City. Yeah, North South, that they've got a barricade between their parking lot and the one that they actually have a transition into right behind. So basically what they didn't want to pay into the association that was operating and maintaining the parking lot. It's like parking lot wars. And so the association put barriers so that nobody could drive through their parking lot to get to the Jimmy John's parking lot. Getting into the Jimmy John's parking lot is incredibly hard because you got to make a hard right and with 40-mile-an-hour traffic around you. And so I went around the block and I pulled into that parking lot of the association, and I just hopped the barrier and went into Jimmy John's, and so fast you freak. I came out seconds later, jumped the barrier again, and I had a ticket on my car. And it's a private ticket, and the only way somebody could have ticketed my car that quickly is if they were just sitting there waiting for someone to hop the barrier to go to Jimmy John's. And I look over and there's 2 people sitting in a truck right across the parking lot. So whole point there, and you'll see that a little bit later in this ordinance, is cross-access easements have to happen. The landowners, if they're going to be doing this, if this is going to function, they have to work with each other. Okay, sorry.
And Charlie will be there with his Jimmy John story to make sure that it happens.
Here, listen to the story, guys. It's the second time Bill had to hear that story.
Pearl Street is a good example because all the 2 places between Washington and Wall
Yep.
are connected, which is very nice.
Perfect example. The worst example is Riverdale Road. Drive in, go to the drive-through. You want to go to the grocery store, you want to go to the clothing store, or you got to go out back on Riverdale Road and then back in. It's terrible. So, and frustrating and aggravating. Okay. Very saving spot. Okay. These mid-block crossings, basically what all this says here, if you haven't already read it. And I put a couple more standards actually up on the screen, so I'll just run through them on the screen. General location of mid-block alleys are shown on each street regulating plan as lines with a lighter weight. Mid-block alleys are only required. Excuse me. So, sorry, I'm bouncing back up to the parent paragraph. They're only required along the GNI, the VOC, the MUC, and the MFR street designations. Because once you get out to the single or the small lot residential, those are residential streets, not mid-block alleys at that point. So kind of where generally we're shown, well, what do we mean by general location? We go into a little bit further detail here. Which is, good gravy, where do we have it? Regardless of its part E up on the screen, not in what you're reading. Regardless of an alley's configuration displayed on the street regulating plan map, a mid-block alley shall be located at a distance that is no greater than 330 feet and no less than 200. So if you've got a longer block, these blocks don't have to be square. We're just saying between intersections, you're looking at 660 feet. Generally. Topography and limitations, sensitive lands, all that goes into how the streets are laid out. Old Town makes sense for them to be blocks because they're already set up on the block system, where Newtown Eden isn't. And so you might see some curvy roads in there. But the point being is if you have more than between main intersection, you got to put a mid-block alley somewhere in there. No further away from one of those intersections than 330 feet and no closer to the intersection than 200 feet. So we're given a range on where that can be, giving you, the landowner, the opportunity to work with other landowners to decide where the best place is for their particular layout. That makes sense? I'm not saying it has to go right here. Okay. If you're looking at part C here, B. Okay, a mid-block alley shall provide both vehicle and pedestrian access to and through the inside of the street block. Specifically, they shall provide access to public shared parking lots, public or private parking garages, and other uses or buildings that are located in the middle of the block. So shared parking lots, that is a new thing that we had always intended this to do, but I didn't realize it wasn't in here until we were looking at this a couple of weeks ago. I'll get into details on shared parking lots in just a minute. When a mid-block alley connects through the street block in which the alley transitions to a residential street, the applicable design or construction standard shall also transition to a typical residential street standard. The alley shall be dedicated for public use, but the operations and maintenance of it shall be the collective and equitable responsibility of all landowners whose parcels and or parking areas gain access from it. An association of owners may be created to specify the details of the management thereof. So part of this is having agreements with the neighboring landowners, and part of the shared parking area will also require those negotiations to happen. I didn't want to go too deep in how that needs to look. If you guys want to create, if a block of landowners want to create their own deal, as long as it's meeting minimum standards, it'll be approved. If they want to play really hardball with everybody else, I mean, at that point, we start assessing fines for people not cooperating with each other until they find that it's not worth it to do business without some kind of a reasonable solution between the different properties. Okay. And when we talk about shared parking lots are only applicable when we're talking about buildings that the public can access. So a multifamily residential building wouldn't require a shared parking lot. They might drive through a shared parking lot that other people have to get to their building. And those buildings that allow patron access or public access, they can still create a private parking lot as long as it doesn't violate any of the other internal block circulation. So not trying to limit that ability, just trying to say, look, your minimum customer parking, share it with your neighbors. They'll provide as much as they need, you provide as much as you need, and then everybody helps each other out. F, the mid-block alley's access to the street shall align with an existing or planned mid-block alley on the opposite side of the street. If there is no existing or planned mid-block alley on the other side, then the subject mid-block alley's access to the street shall be located in a manner that provides reasonable opportunity for the creation of a future mid-block alley on the other side. So if you create your alley and it ends into an existing building that is very likely to ever be torn down, you put the alley in the wrong spot. Okay. And then the width is that. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear because that's a little bit more language there. Okay. Moving on, street design standards. Just want to make it clear that the design standards we're talking about here do not apply to non-multifamily residential streets. So once you get to the small lot residential and bigger, that's just residential streets. Okay, under line 518, switching over to page 44. We just added a new graphic in there to show what a raised crosswalk is. Curb extension bulb outs, we had explained what they were before, but we didn't illustrate what they are, so you could see them illustrated here. Okay. Nothing really big changing. The paved pathway alternative, I think you guys already saw that. Just saying, if it's on the side of the street that you don't have retail opening up onto the street, if it's a park or something like that, you could just do a pathway as opposed to the full 14-foot wide sidewalk with trees and all that kind of crazy stuff. So think around Eden, you might have a pathway around the park instead of the full street sidewalk and all that. Plantings, no changes on 49 or 50 or 51, 52. So I don't know that we got a big chance to talk about this last week. When we did have a discussion about this, someone's in the other room turning lights off. When we did have a discussion about this a month ago, one of the things you guys tasked me to do is let's see if we could all offer more alternatives than just a 30-foot wide pedestrian right-of-way cutting through lots. Maybe it could be reduced down to 15 feet. And in that conversation, you guys wanted to make sure it was clear we're only talking about the form-based zones. We're not talking about everywhere else. So what I did was I added two types. So each development, if you're looking at line 625, each development shall be configured so that the maximum pathway or sidewalk walking distance between pathway or sidewalk intersections is 400 feet. Okay, line 631. Advertises, let's see, pathway shall connect.
Wait, say that again. Each development shall be configured so that the maximum pathway or sidewalk walking distance between a pathway or sidewalk intersection is 400 feet. You're saying there's an intersection every 400 feet?
A pathway intersection every 400 feet.
Pathway intersection,
See,
not intersection, road
it
intersection.
might be a pathway and road intersection. So we do define what an intersection is, but where a pathway crosses a road, that's an intersection. Where a pathway crosses another pathway, that's an intersection. So trying to get your pathway blocks to be a little bit smaller. If you've got mid-block crossings with sidewalks, it's your pathway block. You already got it covered. The mid-block crossings that are here in the middle of the block are 330 feet from the intersection. One block is 660 feet long. Just be clear on the dimensions here. So 400 shouldn't be hard to meet, but if we have like a weird or oblong shape block that a mid-block crossing tends to be more than 400, then you might have to have another mid-block or a pathway built in there. Makes sense. This doesn't just apply to the commercial and multifamily either. This also applies to the residential. So when you're creating your residential streets and street blocks, you'll have to put in those pathways.
Seems excessive for a rural area.
This is only in the form-based area.
Right, it's wouldn't be,
I know, I'm having a hard time.
right, we're not rural anymore.
Not in the form-based.
Right.
So we can always make it not apply to certain street types. So as you get further outward, I mean, estate lot residential, that's 3 acre lots, probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense to have one every 400 out there. Does it make sense on a rural residential? It's 1 acre per lot. Each
One
lot
acre per
being,
lot, you're not gonna have 400 feet anyways.
Hmm.
Unless it's a really long skinny lot. You're
Right.
not gonna want it going right through your lot. I'd say anything less than 1 acre, yeah, I'd require it, but anything above an acre. No, I'm saying you're not gonna have to. And you're out and you're.
you want to expand? Instead of 400, maybe in the 1 acre, you go bigger?
What it's saying is you would be required to do it.
Yeah, I remember this was a big discussion between,
If you don't have it there, then you're not required to do it. So if you got a 3 acre parcel, you're not required to put pathways,
Mhm.
which is what you want if you're buying a 3 acre lot. You don't want a pathway going through it.
No. Okay, apply it to,
The 1 acre and up, in my opinion.
not apply it to 1 acre.
but I was gonna say that's just
Yeah,
backwards.
take it out of the 1 acre.
Take that, yeah, sorry, 1 acre and less than 1 acre, I think it could be applied.
Okay. There are certain, I was gonna say exceptions, but requirements. If you're looking at the street regulating plan, there are pathways kind of predetermined in a few locations.
Which is fine, because that's a master plan, right,
Yep.
or whatever.
Yep. And so it's definitely not 1 every 400 feet though. So, okay, anything less than 1 acre.
Put a crosswalk so they can get across.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm saying if I have 1 acre lot, then I have to put a crosswalk there, or a pathway.
Let's see, pedestrian efficiency, pathway layout.
It's people that maintain.
Here we go. Okay. So lines 623 through 642, that's just pathways and sidewalks generally. And we got 2 pathway types. One is street adjacent pathway. And if you flip over, and that's starting on page 643. And then the other is a non-street adjacent pathway. Now, the street adjacent pathways, they're not running to the middle of blocks, right? Or lots, they're just on the street.
Mhm.
It's actually part of the street right of way. So non-street adjacent pathway, this is where I split it out.
This is where we were talking about like. Within a community, kind of alleys, but not.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's exactly right.
Conversation.
Yep, so if you're looking at line 662. Where a pathway runs between buildings or fenced lots, minimum 30-foot wide pathway right of way is required. The pathway shall run down the center of the 30-foot wide right of way. And the pathway we've already defined as 10-foot wide paved pathway, like the one, well, kind of like the one that goes around Pine View. I don't think that's 10 feet in all locations, but the 30 feet was commissioner's idea because of security
Mhm.
and using that pathway as it runs between 6-foot tall fences or buildings or whatever. But maybe there's a way we can cut that 30 feet down so it's not so impactful to the landowner. That's what the next one down is. Pathway right of way may be reduced to 15 feet if both of the adjoining lots or parcels are or will be single family residential and are deed restricted to only allow solid fence that is no greater than 4 feet or only allow fence that is 30% open with openings evenly distributed.
100%. Okay, if that's, if you can see through it,
Mhm.
is what you're saying, okay,
Basically, yep,
and that's because of the potential for crime. And like
yep,
loitering and,
yeah, eyes on,
Yeah.
yep.
okay,
Are these 30-foot, are they just for the pathways or can they be used for utilities too?
They could be used for anything, yeah, anything underground, yeah. The function of them for people, well, the active function would be for pathways, but the passive function would definitely be for anything that can go, utilities or drainage systems, yeah, I guess it's all utilities. Great spot for them.
I remember this, and then the landowners, the homeowners are responsible for maintaining, because that was a big discussion, the vegetation, the trees, the plants, the whatever.
If it's the 30 foot, if it's the 15 foot.
Oh, I see.
They're probably still required for that, but it's, we're talking about 2.5 feet on either side of the path.
Yeah, because you're still gonna have a 10 foot.
Yeah.
Okay,
If I'm the homeowner, I'm putting rock out there.
sure, yeah.
And
Is there some requirement to be consistent?
in,
The whole pathway, the one, homeowner puts rocks, the next one puts a lot of vegetation.
there is.
They have to maintain it.
Yeah. So if they wanted to run their drip irrigation systems or their sprinkler systems over the fence or under the fence, or maybe they don't have a fence and go right up to the pathway and maintain that, just like some of these lots where the grass goes right up to the asphalt. That's all public right, well, a lot of that's public right away, but they're just maintaining for the aesthetic purpose, and they could do that if they wanted to. And you might see these pathways go 30 feet, 15 feet, 30 feet, 15 feet. I don't think it's gonna be weird to see that, because those fences that buffer that are gonna be see-through. So you're either gonna have an open area where you got lots of public accessibility, and you got a closed-in area, but it's not really closed in because you could see into the yards, you got people in the yards can see out. So gives you the option, if it's 30, to have the private backyard. The other one, not as private, but at least you know that people aren't getting hurt in there.
Little piece.
Okay, we'll have lots of opportunities to tweak it too when we find problems. Okay, turn the page to 55. Okay, this is a new, so what I did was I put the legend for each street regulating plan just up at the very front, on line 682. All street regular.
That's what you're saying. Okay.
That's right. So let's, sorry, people online. And if you're online and having a hard time following this is available on the planning division webpage. So just on the main page, you can see off to the side where the packets are based on the calendar. Okay, sorry, we're getting there. Come on. Okay. So line legend, this just includes the different color for large lot residential and the new medium large street. So nothing has changed from that. On the maps, all the maps that you see on the screen, not in your packet, have been updated for color.
With the new medium large.
So you can see it used to be yellow. If you look at your map, you'll see yellow kind of on that periphery that shows that 20,000. Now that's kind of that yellow green color instead.
Is there still yellow?
No yellow.
No.
No,
it's
just
yellow
the-
green.
Yeah, because if there was yellow, it'd be the medium large,
Got it.
and no, I shouldn't say nobody. There were a few people concerned about dropping the 20,000 down.
No, I got you.
Just leave it as is, no changes.
Okay.
Okay, let's see. In these sections, I'm not including a legend, just to clean it up so it's easier to flow through, and just having the legend to be at the front like I just showed you. So looking at the screen, you can see Eden area. This is the only one that has the legend on the map, and that's just an overall map of that area. And then you got just your zoom in of Old Town or New Town, excuse me. And then next one down, your zoom in of Nordic.
So you're removing this.
Yeah, just, yep, removing that particular graphic from every section. It's
Okay.
redundant. Trying to standardize the line work across all the maps as well, which you didn't see in the packets that you guys had, but you will see on these maps here. So whether you're in Western Weber or the Ogden Valley, this line means this, this line is this street, this line is a trail, this line is an open space, using similar colors and all that. Okay. Is that right? Okay, yeah, this was the map. So originally, when I came to you guys with this, I had made a couple minor tweaks to the Nordic Valley map related to this property up in here. I've turned it back to what it was. I'm probably still gonna recommend to you guys to change it, as I had proposed. But I'll put that kind of as a side item, and if you want the map to change, then you just make it part of your motion, send to the county commission. If you don't want it to change, you want to leave it as is, and we can address that specific change at another time, we can do that too.
Say that one more time. You're proposing changing the colors on this map.
Sorry, yeah, so the colors are, one color is already changing. All the colors that were previously bright yellow are changing to a green yellow color.
Well, we've already approved the Nordic Valley project.
It doesn't,
Grandfathered in, right?
yeah, and it doesn't change any of the street types. It's just the 20,000 square foot is no longer yellow, it's now green.
Okay.
There weren't enough shades of yellow orange to fit in something else that didn't actually see it on the page and on the screen. And there were plenty of more greens, so it's just,
So,
it's a weird problem to have.
so you were just referring just to the colors. You weren't talking about coming back with that street change thing that,
So,
I
no,
thought that's what you're talking about.
no, I will show, so I'm gonna come back in the public hearing
Mhm.
and recommend that the Nordic map do be changed the way that I had originally reflected.
Just the color about what we're doing.
No, he's talking
The
about
street
roads.
configuration and the color.
Do you remember, it was like a couple meetings ago? Or was it a workshop? Might have been a workshop, and that's why we said it, we thought it needed to be in a public hearing.
Yeah.
There
Oh,
were
it definitely
two-
needed to be in a
there
public
was,
And you
the
said the
new
developer
roadmap
would
of
have
the
to make
EV
the
area,
request.
and then there was a small.
I don't know if the
minor change.
developer will on this one.
And then we kind of decided,
This one doesn't,
let's just not touch that.
this
bring
particular
it to a
change
public
doesn't
hearing.
necessarily benefit any
And I
particular
think that's what
developer.
he's referring to. It's
It's,
some road
it's
changes.
more to
It's-
follow
it's
the
changing
topography of the land.
Areas, locations and designations.
That's right.
Yeah,
So that map change, the Eden map change, I'm not gonna make any recommendations on. It's gonna stay as it is
right,
until that particular
Until that.
landowner comes in.
right.
But the changes that I had recommended for the
The
Nordic
Nordic.
map, which didn't sound like you guys had any issues on the front end, it was just, yeah. The issue that I think you guys had was, well, if we change this map, or if we don't change this map, we probably shouldn't
Right.
change this map. And I'm still gonna recommend you do it, but I'm gonna make it very clear in the staff report
And
and in the
split it out,
motion.
right?
Yeah.
Yep, you guys could do what you want to do, put it in or put it out, and then I'll send it to the county commissioners with your guys' recommendation.
Okay,
Okay, and just to be clear, the street reconfiguration, when we did this, we didn't take specific slopes in mind. And we should have.
you're talking
And
about the original one,
the original one,
Yes.
and
and now the new one that you will be coming to us with a proposal does.
yes,
That was the point.
Mhm.
Okay,
that was the point. Yep. And it's not driven by a particular applicant, even though the applicant has had a discussion about it. That applicant is actually moving forward with their project outside of the form base, and so they're not, it's not even gonna affect them. Oh, okay.
okay.
So. And it doesn't change density, it doesn't do it, it just moves the way the lines go on the mountainside. You can see if you flip over, you can see the proposed West Weaver configuration. Which might be fun to look at if you care to look at it. It's actually quite a bit larger of an area than any of the village nodes that you see in the Ogden Valley, but they're trying to put a city up there or out there at some point in time. Okay. Flipping over. I didn't,
For TDRs, or-
yep, I haven't proposed any changes. Except for, from what you guys have previously read, except for the highlighted area on page 68. So Trevor mentioned that in one of the meetings about, I think it was a month ago, so 2-3 meetings ago, he said, this whole thing is changing. That's not the intention. The TDR section is intended in the Ogden Valley to be the same. We're just splitting it out for Western Weaver and Ogden Valley and finding good junctures to make that split. And so what it used to be was, well, we didn't even have to say in the Ogden Valley. It was just TDRs are going to work this way.
Mhm.
Now that we're working in the Ogden Valley and the Western Weaver with TDRs, we've got an A, which is transfers generally. We've got a B, Ogden Valley Planning Area form-based zone transfers. That's on line 613. And then C line, 813, and then line C 820, Western Weaver Planning Area form-based zone transfers. So that's how you could see the density ratio, the bonus ratio is only under the Western Weaver transfer section. So if you look at the transfer ratio under the Ogden Valley, it says 1-to-1. So there is no incentive offered. I mean,
Except for resorts.
What?
um. Outside of form-based, yeah, outside of the
Yes,
form-based
yes.
goes.
Yes.
Yeah, because the transfer instead of matching unit for the definition that we read at the very beginning, that only applies to the DRR1 zone. So there is potential for resorts to get density transfers or a bonus density transfer.
Resorts. So I said just resorts.
The resorts in the DRR1 zone specifically, so not even Nordic. Nordic is under this one here. Okay. And then the addition of the banking, and I know Jeff, you're
Yeah.
opposed to that. Do we have any other
Yeah.
folks who are?
So I, if I could just take a minute, because I
Please,
would feel remiss if I didn't. I took a close look 2 or 3 times at the Ogden Valley General Plan. I mean, I read the whole thing when I first joined this board, and then I read it again, and my first impression was this, the whole thing is generally light on details. But
it's a general plan.
general, but chapter 3 seemed to be the one place where there were a range of details. And I noticed that a lot of those details were just not brought into the TRD process, even though they were referenced there in some specificity. So
Right.
it's my impression, and I don't remember the details. I went to some of the meetings, but and that there must have been a lot of effort to come up with a lot of those details that found their way into the document. But they're not finding their way into the actual code. And when I look at this, the TDR process, and I look at, everything I've been exposed to and kind of think, well, what in 20 years are we really going to be held accountable for? Probably 90% of it, not much, but this is the one thing 20 years from now that's going to matter, I think, in the valley. Especially in the context of the last meeting where water and sewer was talked about a lot. We've talked here about the state requirement for a water use conservation plan. We talked last meeting about very significant limits on transportation, roads that aren't really going to change. The state's not going to run in and redo the roads in advance of there being big problems. And the overall infrastructure limitations and the cost to put in a sewer system in the valley that runs across the valley and a culinary water system and all of that. So, you look at all of that and you look at what was written that's often referred to up and down the chain in Weber County as the plan we have to adhere to, but yet we're not. So I saw several areas that, and maybe some of these are in, I just don't know it. But for example, the first one is in here, it says that this commission should approve or has to approve every single TRD.
Mhm.
Is that in or out?
Oh.
Out. Okay, well, it's in here. So.
Mhm.
Which one supersedes? I mean,
It's
which-
The ordinance.
The ordinance.
Yeah, this is law,
This
that's
is law.
guidance.
This is, but, this is, again, just my opinion, when this is held out by the county commission and others as the Bible, so to speak. And then you disregard it, it takes the credibility away from this completely.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
So I do think that this board should review and approve each one. There's not gonna be thousands.
Right.
There's not gonna be hundreds probably. The second one is I don't think, and it doesn't say so explicitly in here, but I don't think third parties should be involved. I don't think realtors, brokers, people should be out there drumming up business and taking a cut away from the land sellers on these transactions. In here, there's language that talks about creating a market, and I think there are specifics in here about how to create a market.
Mhm.
And that's basically a registry.
Yeah.
And because it's such a limited situation, in my mind, that registry would work. It would match those that want to sell, those that want to buy.
Yeah.
Without allowing people to get in there and create situations for their own profit that maybe shouldn't exist in that time frame. If sellers don't want to sell, why should there be people out there trying to convince them to sell so that third party can make a buck?
Gotcha.
In my opinion. I think maybe you told me, because this references these transactions should be in the public record that's easily accessible, and that's in
Yes,
there,
right.
correct?
Yep. In fact, here, let me,
Oh, that's okay if it's in there. So I also think that in here, it talks about that development rights shouldn't be sold from everywhere. And if a piece of land, big or small, has already given up their development rights, whether it be through conservation easement or through somebody buying a piece of land that they sign up for when they buy it, that they can't subdivide it, then they can't, those lands should not be subject to TDR. The monastery is the best example. That land is being farmed right now. They've given up their development rights to put it in. And that land or other similar lands, which will probably, hopefully continue to be farmed, should not be able to then sell development rights that they don't really have anymore since they've given them up. And probably most or as bad would be the large 500+ acre private developments that are out there, that a couple of them I know are desperate for money. Like, and a couple $1 million on the table for selling TDRs off 400 acres that are restricted already by the owners. But if they can find a way to monetize that, to put in a new road or bail them out of debt or whatever, they're probably going to do that.
Yeah.
And there's probably a lot more of those that I'm aware of. And I think that very much is detrimental to what this, the intent of this was.
I agree.
Banking, which I know is in here and we've discussed, banking is contrary to this in that you're creating something, an artificial situation whereby you're not helping the landowner. They can still sell or not. If there's a buyer, they can sell just like any other transaction. If there's a buyer, they can sell, they can develop themselves, they can do whatever they want. Banking creates an artificial scenario that may put pressure on some of these other realities sooner than the valley can withstand them, specifically the infrastructure problems, the road problems, and the other limitations in the valley. If you let this play out over 20, 30 or more years, some of these things will work themselves out, some won't. But if you try to punch it all in and you put the benefit to developers, if you give the benefit to developers, which I firmly believe banking is nothing but a benefit for developers, you're going to create some traction where maybe that traction ought to come a little bit further down the road. Doesn't mean a landowner, a farmer can't decide to do whatever they want with their land in the meantime.
Right.
It just means you're going to put less pressure on some of these problems, especially the state mandated water conservation planning. Density bonuses, we talked about that, where 60, I read this week, 68% of all the water used in Utah is used to water hay, to farm hay. So if you are still, if you have a piece of land, you transfer the density bonus out, or the building, the ability to build out, but you're still watering hay to produce hay, but yet you're building homes somewhere else with that development right, you're completely contrary to what the state wants you to do with respect to managing water use. Find to produce hay, but then building homes on top of that where you're still watering hay and giving the developer a bonus is, once again, you're handing the developer a cash bonus in reality, and you're being contrary to what the state wants with water management. And at the same time, you're penalizing everybody else who might have to change their irrigation system because there isn't enough water to meet what the state wants to do, even though there's plenty of water around, the state still has these mandates. And then the last thing I noted here that is very specific in here, and this is one of the things where they actually wrote down back then, and it made it all the way through the process, that development rights shouldn't be transferred off of certain types of land. And they said 30% slopes, wetlands, and some other, I forgot what the other category was. And that makes sense to me, because sure, you could build something on a 30% slope, but who would? I mean, in reality, if you want to, fine, build it. But why? But no one really is going to spend the money. They're just going to sell the development right because they can, even though it was recognized here by everybody involved, the county, the the author, the public, that it makes no sense to do that. And it's contrary to all these other realities. Anyway, those are my observations with this. Banking, I know banking's in here. And I just see banking as a big bonus for developers. And it's gonna put traction in areas in development that may not ought to have traction right now.
Yeah.
It doesn't take away anybody's right to not to bank. No one bought a piece of farmland and is a professional farmer out there because they thought someday they'd be able to sell development rights into a land or into a bank.
Right.
That never, I mean,
No,
that's not. an
Nobody
issue.
even thought about that.
Yeah,
No,
so
it's a new right we're creating.
it's a new right that's being, or a new situation that's being created for the benefit of developers. It doesn't take anything away from any landowner that I can see. It just accentuates everything and makes everything happen potentially more rapidly and more easily, especially if third parties get involved.
Let me ask you a question on the third party. Do you want the ordinance to specifically disallow third party involvement?
I don't know how that would be written. I don't know what the legalities or what your typical way to approach something like that, but I think the language in here with respect to creating a market seems to me, because it's such a limited situation where you have a, you know, a listing of people who are interested in selling their development rights off, and buyers would know where to go to look, who's interested. That would seem to me to be more powerful than having brokers knocking on doors and trying to earn a cut out of these deals.
Yeah, I agree. And,
But I don't know how you would write that, so.
well, so on the, let me pull this up. On the subject of having like a clearinghouse or a place where people can go and look at what is for sale, what is available for
Or
sale.
who's interested in talking about.
So we've actually got a parcel on the map that, or parcel layer on the map that shows that. Now this is 10-year-old data. And so we've got to figure out how to do data management on this, figure out whether or not these guys are even really willing. But as we get willing buyers out calling these guys to figure out if they really do want to sell. I think a lot of this has a conservation easement on it now, but at the time, whenever this layer was created, it didn't. So buyers want to buy and they go to one of these guys and say, hey, they're not willing to sell anymore. And we just give them a call and find out and then take them off the list. So just a little bit of management of that shapefile, which we could do.
If we're treating these rights as a tangible thing, do they get taxed if you own them in a bank?
If it's revenue, I think it'd be at the point that you create revenue. I don't know how the
You're
IRS can deal with it.
Well, even the county, if you're taking the density right off the plan, and it makes it less valuable, but it goes into a bank. Some guy has 200 on them.
Mhm.
Makes your property less valuable. You can
You're right, but
transfer it
you're
from.
still paying the taxes and all your density rights in this pretend bank that we just made up.
So in that particular case, what the assessor's office is doing is they're assessing you off of potential development ability. If that's wiped out, your assessment goes down a lot more.
But then the taxes, and then some guys pretend bank just went on. With
Potentially.
density rights,
Mhm.
it should be
The right to put a lot of, Yeah.
treated as a tangible thing.
yep, so they may be paying more taxes if it's banked on that.
Well, that's only if somebody's actually gonna do. the
But they're
right
not attaching it to any ground or nothing, so it's
So
just in the air.
The only way to bank,
investment.
according to this, would be to attach it to
To attach
property.
it to a piece of property.
I can't be responsible for holding the
Certificates.
the table that lists all of them. We're gonna lose them.
You're saying attached to the original property it came from?
No,
No,
No.
it'll be attached to the property where it
the
gets banked on.
receiving,
So remember,
Receiving.
you could, we were discussing that, it hasn't happened, so I'm gonna say it like it's what is, but it's not. In order to bank or purchase, you had to be in a form base, because we had that discussion of like, well, if I want to get out on this market, then I need to get my home rezoned into a form base, because you have to live in a form base in order
Yes.
to start buying.
you don't have to live
I would
there, you have
agree
to
with that.
own the property.
That was-
Own a
That's
piece of
fine, that's
property.
it.
You could own a 1
That's it.
acre piece of
It doesn't have to be
property
big, it could be. a
and put
condo.
1,000 development rights on that 1 acre,
Right.
even though you could
Right.
never use them
Right,
there.
exactly, because you just have.
You just have to
property.
house them there on paper.
Yes.
On paper.
With the
Tax
county.
should Be through the roof if you got 1,000.
But then they'd have to also do the legwork to hunt down that information,
Right.
which not only do I not pursue, which is yay for that person, but not so yay for the homeowner who sold the development right, because they're gonna have to fight with the tax assessor to lower their assessment.
And I,
It
Things like
don't
that.
seem like it's
I don't-
set up yet, ready.
Oh,
to
not
do
at
it
all.
kind of thing.
I'm more worried about accelerating development artificially before the valley can withstand that. And in the face of, at the same time, the state saying you need to have a legitimate water conservation plan.
Mhm.
And making major changes in the valley in ways that could be detrimental. And they could really change the economics, property economics, if too much of this happened.
Yeah.
In a way that isn't staged
Mm.
appropriately, and to the detriment of land holders who sell too soon.
Yeah.
You know, if there's somebody out there saying, I'll buy them all now, just like everything else, 10 years from now, chances are property will be worth a lot more
Mhm.
in 10 years. And if they're banking it somewhere, someone stands to make a fortune if they have the funding to do that.
Mhm.
And the farmers are gonna lose out. They may still be farming, but they'll lose some valuation.
Yeah, I can see that happening. I could take the banking or leave it. I'm not sold on it being the right thing to do. It's in there because I think it was brought up by commissioners, or it was brought here. I can't remember. if it
How
was
do
you
they
guys
feel
were
about
counting.
banking?
They like the idea, but I think that the context of that discussion is important because they're trying to figure out, all right, how do we make TDRs work? And so I think if they heard it through this context, they'd see it a little bit differently.
What if you look at it like this, like say they're in a mixed use say somebody buys a piece of property, mixed use multifamily. You know, maybe they're based off their lot size and whatever they purchased, maybe they're allowed to have so many TDRs. I mean, because if you just have a guy that has a 1 acre lot and he wants to get 1,000 TDRs, that makes zero sense because he can't put 1,000, units on that anyways.
Yep. He might not even be able to put one.
He might not even be able to put one, yeah.
But if he owns them, he controls a significant,
Mhm.
he controls a lot going forward. If he's able
Just like
to.
water, right?
Yeah.
But if you had a piece of property in the form-based zone, that you could actually do something with those TDRs, it would make more sense to sell it to somebody that could actually use them in there. That would stop some of the banking, I think.
Thinking cap it to what property can hold.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not banking, that's just buying them to use.
Well, yeah.
Your property that you have.
I mean, you'd be banking them for a time if you.
Oh, sure.
You'd have to acquire them as you were purchasing the land to make sure you could get them.
Yeah, but that would be, I wouldn't consider that banking, I would just. That's just buying them to use, whether you use them now or.
Did we decide once they're there, they're there? So we have.
If it's inside the form base, it stays inside the form base. It can't be moved out.
Couldn't it be moved to another form base? I
Yeah.
thought we talked about
I
that.
think we did say that.
But if he puts 1,000, then all 1,000's gotta be using the form base or they're just gone.
The thing that banking that bugs me is, and we talked about this months ago, but is the relationship to double dipping, right? So. You buy a big piece of property, it comes with a bunch of development rights. And you decide, instead of just using them all and making whatever money that goes, you do
Larger lots.
large lots, exclusive, aspirational type homes. You're selling them at a higher price point. You get a benefit from doing that. It's a choice that you make in your business model, in your business plan.
Mhm.
To then get to take the rest of those and go build a bunch of condos somewhere else. Seems a lot like double dipping. You get the best of both worlds. And if we are, like the last meeting workshop, discussing ways to pump the brakes because of all the difficulties, the traffic and the water and all this other stuff. One quick way is to say, when you buy these rights, you have the choice of what to do with them, but you don't get to hang on and go use them again somewhere else. You do with the property what you want to do with it. And based on the business plan you have, whether that's exclusive, aspirational, or affordable housing density,
Sure.
that's your business plan. That's what you want to do.
You know, maybe to push back on that a little bit, when you buy the initial chunk of land, you are not only buying the potential for the $1 million homes you're talking. $10 million homes you're talking about.
Yeah, what are you talking, $1 million, drop in the
Yeah,
bucket.
please.
Chunks. You're buying all of the development rights that go with that. So your outlay initially includes all of those rights to develop. So if you bought 90 acres in a AB3 zone and you knew that you were only going to build 10 lots of, 9 acres each, then the remaining 20 lots you could sell, or, that's a valuable resource. Now, whether that's banked or not, that's an open question. And, I don't want to wade into that conversation. That's a whole other topic, but the idea that someone would just buy a piece of property and then waive off all of their rights because they got some profit on that, that doesn't seem right either.
My business plan could include the double dipping part of it.
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, you paid for that potential when you bought the original
And
property.
that's different than what I said with respect to primarily existing large tracts where the developer and the individual lot owners have already agreed not to subdevelop.
Yeah.
So they're in knowing whatever, if they bought a 50-acre lot, that's it, one building on 50 acres, no more.
They bought a 50-acre lot with the understanding and agreement, CCNR, whatever it is, with
yes.
other landowners, that it
Yes.
will not be divided.
Subdivided,
Shouldn't be development rights.
right,
Okay, so-
those shouldn't be able to be then, rethink it, trick out your CCNR and walk away with a couple $1 million.
Let's address that one first, and then let's go to banking. Because my laptop's about to die, and I want you guys to see what I wrote.
I brought one down.
That just means that, that just means that I have to leave it on.
There you go.
It means the meeting doesn't. end.
give me that back. That's mine.
Okay, I have
Excuse
a
me,
part
everybody.
over here.
And I'm not arguing that that's the way to go or whatever. I'm just saying, there are a lot of different ways. We're creating something new. And so we also can just slow down with it. We can do one without doing, 2 and 3.
Yeah, so I want to hold the subject that you're talking about, because I think that deserves its own individual consideration. Let's touch on the one with restrictions and covenants, and Cortland, I'm probably gonna ask you to weigh in. Did you get that email?
That's all the email.
Okay,
exchange.
okay, good. So I sent an email over to Cortland to look at this a little bit deeper, just to see how much we can be involved, but adding in language to transfer density. Transfer density on line 796, or starting on 796 at the very end of that paragraph. I really like what you're talking about, Jeff. So I added in a sentence that says private contracts, covenants, restrictions, conservation easements, or any other document held by a third party that restricts or prohibits certain development rights from being developed shall be considered a previous reduction of residential development rights, provided, however, that the development right reduction is clearly stated in a recorded document and the third party is willing to enforce it. So one of the reasons why there's that caveat at the end is because if the county starts getting into these CCNRs and we have to start interpreting what it says, that's when we start to get named in those lawsuits. Those CCNRs are not written under the same rules that ordinances and development agreements have to be written. Ordinances and development agreements, any ambiguity, any error, potential error of interpretation has to be favored to the landowner. Whereas those CCNRs, those are just contracts amongst landowners. And so sometimes they tend to be a little more vague.
So in that language, would that allow you to change your CCNR,
Yeah,
make the sale, and then change it right back?
that's the one I want Cortland to look at.
Because that's where the problem
Yeah,
will come.
it doesn't solve the bigger issue
Right.
that you're looking at. Right. So,
If you could have language that said that if property was acquired with that in place, then it stays in place. The private covenant, if the private covenant existed,
Right.
And it was recorded, then that erases your ability to sell.
Okay, I like it. I've asked Portland to kind of look into ways that we could potentially do it. We're gonna have to have a method of potential appeal. Otherwise, everything would go to the district court on that. Give you just a side story, just to help you understand the concern. Green Acres subdivision down on the south end of the valley, or eastern end of the valley. They had an agreement with the original developer. So the original developer actually made an agreement with himself and then sold the development one piece at a time. That the property to the above, driving through the Green Acres, Green Hills, sorry, not Green Acres.
Canyon.
Yeah, the canyon, driving up that canyon, dead end road, that they could do up to a certain amount of homes above that. And the CCNRs specified, what you could do and what you couldn't do, but the CCNRs weren't written using the same language that the ordinances were written.
Mm.
And so the gentleman who owns above that was thinking, all right, it says 16 residential units, but the county also allows recreation lodges on these properties. And so I'm going to build commercial buildings that are built to the International Building Code instead of the International Residential Code. There's still going to be residences that kind of operate like commercial lodges.
This is the sanctuary.
Yeah, and so basically what we said was, you know what, we're reading we're reading your CCNRs and it's not quite clear what exactly the original contract was for. And anyway, I think it was Green Hills. Green Hills appealed that and ended up going to district court. Was that a district court thing, and named the county on that? Now we were able to get unnamed because our specific approach to that was to not read or interpret the agreement. We just said, to the extent that you are allowed to do these things, then here are the stipulations on your permit. And then I think Green Hills won, right?
I can't remember.
On that one, did they? I think they won. Yeah. So basically, we're able to prove that no, our original agreement said residences, not lodges. The owner of the sanctuary also said, it said 16 dwelling units. It didn't say I can't do other uses that the county code allows in that zone. And that's where the lodges came in. It's like, hey, I'm not doing more than 16 residences. I'm actually doing 16 lodges.
But those
Anyway.
are- The house that's up there is for sale as a house right
Yeah.
now.
I was gonna say, I
It
think I
is,
just
and-
saw it as a house without shares or whatever.
All of the other buildings that either were proposed, I don't know if they've been built, they're all gonna have to be residences, because I think the judge made a determination on that. If he came to the county and said, I want to do a bunch of lodges up there, actually, I don't know, we might have changed the code to not allow lodges, but if he did say, I want to do a bunch of lodges up there, we would probably have to approve it. But that doesn't mean that he's entitled to violate the CCNRs.
Mhm.
So I'm gonna have Cortland look a little deeper, like how we can craft language
Sure.
to say that.
And private developments under CCNR would be different than conservation easements
Mhm.
or other programs like that.
Yeah, and a conservation easement, so I just kind of grouped it together so that we could say, if there is that restriction on those development rights, they just don't exist. And this sentence here, or this last sentence that we added in, it's intended to apply to, see, what's the line from another lot or parcel that has an available residential dwelling unit, right? So if you go to someone who doesn't have another residential dwelling unit, right, because one of these restrictions exist, then that shouldn't be counted. We shouldn't be able to say you could go ahead and buy that because there's already a restriction there. So we're gonna look at that. How do we make the county kind of a third party to all those agreements? Hopefully we can just write an ordinance that says, if your CCNRs at this date here, your CCNRs said you can't do it, you can't change your CCNRs to say you can make those trades. Okay, so that's that subject. We're gonna try and get it as tight as we can on that. The other subject is somebody goes in, they develop bigger lots than what the zone allows them for, sell them at a premium. And then sell the development rights also at a premium, double dipping.
But you would do that up front before you sell the land to an individual. I
Yes.
assume.
So the commissioners actually had a good conversation, good long conversation about this, and Jenkins. The three of them weren't speaking the same language through the whole conversation. But Jenkins' position at the time was the subdivision should wipe it all out. And I had to walk Commissioner Jenkins through, well, if you've got a 10-acre lot in a 3-acre zone, and you have one dwelling unit on that lot, and you want to subdivide it to create 2 more lots for 2 more dwelling units, well, there's
Right.
nothing in our ordinance right now that would prohibit that from happening. And he said, well, they don't have frontage. Well, they might have frontage, depends on how wide the frontage is. And if they don't have frontage on a street, they could build a street to give them frontage. And so the right still is there, just by virtue of subdividing the land does not eliminate that right. If we were to rezone the property at the time that they proposed the subdivision and downzoned it, so they had less development rights, that would stick. That would be a sticky, something that we could do.
But couldn't they still, in advance of proposing a subdivision, sell the rights they felt they wouldn't need?
Yes, and so that'd be the other side of it. And that's where the commissioners landed. They basically said, let's adopt an ordinance that says, if it's been platted, you cannot re-subdivide. And I think that's gonna come to a blows at some point in the future when somebody says, I could have put more lots on here, Commissioner, change the rule. I think that is what's gonna happen if we do adopt it, but maybe we start there. But they could wipe all those development rights out before they start platting their 10-acre lots. And so when I say wipe them out, they could sell all the rest of them that they're not planning.
Well,
on
they-
platting.
Can't yet because we haven't adopted.
We have. Sorry, Ogden Valley has a TDR ordinance that is adopted. It's all the black line that's in there.
Sorry, there's a lot of red and blue.
There is.
There's a little, only very little black.
It's not a big ordinance.
Okay. So
If-
they can sell them,
If they have a lot in the form-based zone.
which there is one. Form-based zone.
Nordic. Mhm,
Right.
That's right. So they could,
Basically, they're useless.
you're
You're
the
saying,
rights.
no. Never mind, I take back what I just said.
Okay.
I just answered.
Yeah, there, you wouldn't be able to sell anything until you had a piece of property in that form-based zone, and then you can transfer it to that property. Now, the way that the current ordinance is written, banking isn't written in there. That would be,
Right, we're
That's
adding,
this
this,
addition.
we're creating a new,
if we adopt it, right, if you guys want to move forward with it.
I'm going with no banking.
Okay.
I feel like,
Okay,
I like the idea that we could say no now and say yes later. Like, if we say yes now, this is what we have, and then you've got lawsuits being like, you said I could, you know, if
What-
we say no now, we can always add it.
yeah. What if it was, let's say no now, it's coming up again, I like it. What if this particular component, because I want to get back to the other subject of every TDR, there needs to be specific deliberation on. What if this particular component, there was specific deliberation? If they want a bank, then the planning commission has to make specific deliberation on whether or not it's being brought from appropriate land and transferred to appropriate land. Do you feel like,
But it shouldn't be able to be taken from non-appropriate land anyway, so why do we have to say?
I'll tell you in just a second. Because I don't want to dive into that
Would there
subject yet.
be
Want to space this out a little bit.
numeric criteria where you could say no without recourse, such
Yes.
as that piece of property can't house, you know, that many building rights?
Yes. So we could do it all through the rezone. Or we can come back and make it a legislative decision afterwards, which I guess technically we can already do it through a development agreement. I'd just rather not have all these development agreements hanging out there, because I can tell you this much. If somebody's banking and it's in a development agreement that I can't track easily, it's gonna get lost. And then someone's gonna show up at the table with 1,000 development rights that we didn't realize existed.
Are you guys going to track the development rights?
Mhm, we already are. Yeah, so were you here the day that we were looking at the ledger? So there's a notice that runs with the land that has a ledger attached to it, and every transfer or receipt of a development right would be tracked on that ledger.
So is that like what's the word? It's like a water.
Mhm. Yeah, and we're
Then
the,
you track all that, because you're not tracking water rights.
no, so we would have to track that. That's one of the reasons why I don't want an ethereal bank, a paper bank. I want it to be on the county record in the county recorder's
That's
office.
what I was saying. Will they record, will re-record
Yes.
the property every time density rights come out,
Yes,
so that it shows the proper amount?
that's right.
Okay.
And
And the new ones should be recording with every new right they acquire.
every send, every send has that agreement that gets recorded the property, every receive. And if you sent and then you received, you would just see every transaction that happens in it. From the dawn of TDRs, you would see every single one that happened. You could trace where every single one of these rights went.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but you're not, because I asked you this before, many moons ago, that you don't have a list of all of the development rights in the valley and who owns what. You are simply now tracking a buy and a sell. That's it. And then you mark off like that property has sold that one off, and now that property doesn't have one, but you don't have big picture.
We have
Okay.
a general big picture, and we talked about it in our last meeting.
Really just the
somewhere between.
Aggregate of the land divided by 3,
That's right.
right, but you're not saying like, you don't have a list of who owns what in the valley, right?
No, not, we could go through every single one. If we did a more, the more simplified process, we could go through and just say, according to our calculations now, this is what you have, and go record a notice saying that. I don't think there's any difference between doing that and just doing them on a case by case when someone's asking to buy and sell.
That's fine, I'm just.
And the map will actually show on the map where those, what parcels there are. So you can click on that layer on the map and it will actually bring their notice up, which will have the most recent ledger that's been recorded. And so every time it updates, someone will be able to see that and track that. So we'll be identifying specific parcel numbers that a right comes from and goes to. And the final development right that exists on that property after that transaction. So maybe we say, based on our calculations, you've got this amount of development rights on your property. They do a bunch of switcheroos, and at the very end, we see at the bottom line, all right, how many do you have left? So very clear accounting, and it gets recorded to the property so that it's not lost. Kurt had a question. Are you okay, Mr. Pro Tem Chair? If we-
Yeah, we'll take a question.
I've been involved in this planning up the valley for 30 years, was extensively involved with
Would you please
Resort.
state your name?
Kirk Langford with the resort plan, and I think you pointed out really good, Jeff, why we were so concerned with being specific in the general plan, because we knew this day would come, and here it is. And I think, you know, to the extent that anybody's on the planning commission that can bring the general plan to fruition is serving the community. And I think you guys are all trying to do that, so thank you. But here's how we saw it. You know, when you look, you know who has development rights when you go look at the land and there's nothing on it, and it's 3 acres only, and somebody owns 1,000 acres. And so if somebody wants to buy a TDR and move it into this super high density, which by the way, nobody thought it was going to be this super high. This is super high density, this form based. But that when that got sold, that land gets re-recorded with now the development rights. It goes to the county recorder with a contract on that says you can't go back in and rezone and recreate those again. They're gone. They're gone in perpetuity, similar to a conservation easement. The receiving person now receives the development rights on the land and it gets recorded. And if I record them and then in the form base and I sell it to you, they're still on that land. And when I get ready to sell it, I get the value to the next person that sells them right there. And now they're there for that person to use or not use, right? And, you know, it was just that simple. But it has to be recorded when it leaves the land that you can't come back in and get a rezone. So right now through a conservation easement, you cannot, the monastery can't come and say, I've changed my mind. I'd like to go to the county and get rezoned again and get another 1,000 units that you guys just took on. when Snow Basin moved their units off the port boat ramp and moved them up to the mountain, they re-recorded that property with the remaining entitlements. I think it was 450 and they transferred 300 on the hill. And they got a bonus for it. But it was also supposed to be for commercial use, which the county took away, by the way, during COVID. And took away the use of TDRs for commercial use in the resort zone, which was really unfortunate because one unit was for 5,000 square feet. And it made a huge difference. But anyway, you with me, then that port boat ramps now recorded with only 150 units. They can't come back and get 200 again from the county. It's not that complicated.
And that's the process that's been adopted.
Yeah. But banking opens up a whole new can of worms, or creating units where you don't have them, like Ogden City's tend to do. They buy a piece of property,
Upzone everything.
they can't really build there because they have the well, so they're pretending like they got 550 units, now they want to sell them. And they want to sell them to the bank, right? I mean, you know, Jeff articulated the problem with the banking. And so I would think if you guys can stick close to that, that would be my recommendation. A lot of us were torn whether we should even have the transfer of development rights because it would be abused.
Yeah.
Like taking them off slope and moving them to the form-based village. No one thought that that would take place, and no one certainly ever thought you would take it from a high-density village already and move them to the hinterland and annex another big piece of property. I mean, nobody even discussed something like that happening because we couldn't even foresee that kind of an egregious move.
Right, and that's one of the things that, like, when we have big language, even if it's just as silly as the colors, and we say, well, but people will want something that looks like, people are gonna do things you don't foresee, right? Like, you're gonna be, who would ever do that? Somebody. Somebody
I'm
will.
gonna come back with specific color codes.
But I'm just, and I'm not trying to be a micromanager, but you do have to write these things for the worst case scenario,
Yeah.
because somebody will do it.
That's the primary reason they exist, is because you have poor performers. Okay, so banking. My other thought, you guys had a brief exchange that I don't think was on the record very clearly. What I heard you guys kind of go back and forth on is if somebody does transfer to a piece of property, the amount that could be built, whether or not they do build it, that's not a banking, that's just a transfer. Okay.
Yeah, that's just what the TDR is for, I guess.
Okay, good. So that's still an option that is available.
It's not banking because you're limited to what your land can
What you-
provide.
what you-
Right.
You also, it's possible to build there.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, it's zoned for it, it's there, and it's towards the thing. You
So-
can't put-
I have a question for you, and I think I maybe already asked the question several meetings ago, but say you have a certain amount of density rights, TDRs in an already high density area.
Mhm.
Why would it make sense to move it from there to another form-based? Why would it make sense to move those to a form-based village when you're already kind of taking them from an area where they should be anyways?
Are we talking about Wolf Creek?
Yes.
That exchange on Kobe.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense to me because that right there, all that land was purchased. And all those pieces of property have density rights to them. You're now taking those and you're moving them somewhere else. It doesn't make sense to me.
Yep.
Why you would move them. You should keep them up there.
I was interested to see the planning commission's favorable recommendation on that for that reason.
Could it be a timing issue?
Well, so there were a couple of things going on at the same time. Number one, we were talking about the bigger TDR program, which included an overlay zone. And at the time of looking at that overlay zone, we were looking at two types of receiving areas. One being the village areas, the other one being areas close to infrastructure. And we still had not pinned down at that point, if it's area close to infrastructure, how small lot sizes are we going to allow in that area? And so as we were looking at this particular property, we knew, well, it's going to be at least 1 unit to the acre if it's just a 3 acre subdivision. So if they just go standard subdivision, there's gonna be a road that goes in there, it's gonna be chopped up into 3 acre lots. So infrastructure is gonna exist there. Maybe this is one of those situations of receiving in a non-village area, just in an area that's otherwise being developed. We wouldn't have looked at it that way if we knew we were just gonna stick with the ordinance that's here, just only into villages. So that's number one. Number two, I mentioned to Janet a little bit earlier today that when that transaction happened, right, we knew that they were gonna put a bunch of development there, one unit to 3 acres or whatever they could do. So, and those condos were gonna be right next to, those short-term rental condos were gonna be right next door to other short-term rental condos. It's density going where infrastructure is, and that is what the plan suggests happen. And so we thought that that was gonna be fine. The owners of those condos came out very strongly opposed to it, even though they've got a short-term rental condo, right?
Exactly.
And so at that point, that's when the developer shifted a little bit, and the recommendation from planning staff was already out, and infrastructure is going to be there. You might as well let it happen. But the other side of it was from that village node, that transfer that comes out and into this other area. We've got a landowner who wants to market something today using TDRs. And if we force them to stay here versus allow them to come over here, either way, what this landowner is suggesting is that there isn't a market for TDRs to exist right here. Otherwise, they'd be building the TDRs there. But frankly, I don't know if that was entirely the case, because these units were getting a premium for their view, where these units in the form-based village area might not have had that same kind of view. They would have been your neighbors. So I don't know, maybe they would have had a view, or I don't know, but yeah, your
Taking mine.
condos, yeah. And so I think that transfer, there was a lot more motivation for the developer to build these here, but let's just pretend for a second it was just a value for value transfer that would have, and the developer was saying, there's not a market for it to go right here, but there is a market for it to go right here where I'm already putting infrastructure. They're supporting the plan for that. It's not great. The plan says village areas are the primary receiving areas, but there's some support for that. And if this village node ever became profitable from a marketable perspective, there's a vacuum on it right now at that point, because there are no, well, there are a few units in it. And that would then, that vacuum would suck other units in from other open spaces.
Those density rights are essentially non-usable in that area.
How do you mean?
Like say, so Wolf Creek, for example, I don't know, I don't even know the statistics or whatever, or what the numbers are, but say there's 200 rights that Wolf Creek has. And that essentially they're banking them because they have them, but they're not banking them, I guess, however you want to talk about it. But say they have these, but they have nowhere to use them.
That's the result of thinking.
I know, so they gotta move them, but otherwise, if they weren't allowed to be moved out of there, then that's that many units off the valley floor.
That's my point.
Yeah.
But I say, don't allow the begging with the double dipping, as you get them retired.
Or potentially retired, yeah. There's a little bit less predictability on that potential side, but maybe that's okay. I mean, there's an element of unpredictability in a lot of things we do. So it's not to say that they didn't have a place to put them. They have a place to put them. There's a village core. They are planning on putting units in that village core when it's marketable to do so. It's just not right now. And I've seen the village core master plan. They're not ready to submit it for approval or anything like that. So they are going to be doing residential units in that village core. They just couldn't get the other transfers that they, not using any names. This particular developer couldn't get the other transfers from other properties that they possibly could have used to transfer into another area off the ground, because we didn't have transfer ordinance at all that they could have used at that time. It's a timing issue. Now, had they come in today with the form-based ordinance that we have right now, technically Wolf Creek isn't in the form-based area, but I think that would have been a hard no from our perspective. We probably would have said, you know what? Covade is a good spot for open space. The general plan shows it as green. Should be open space, and so if you're gonna use your rights to put 1 unit per 3 acres there, and you're okay to take the smaller amount of money that would come out of the development, fine. It will ruin that open space, but at least it's not incentivizing the ruining of that open space. But that was, the more you know, had we known it would land here, we probably would have started here.
Well, hang on, because there was also a discussion, and again, this is trying to actually put it down into a code. And we've had discussions that are just discussions, they're not written into code.
Mhm.
But there has been discussions in some of our workshops about, where people start to theorize about, well, I mean, we have 7 villages in the general plan, but those are just kind of things we picked based on infrastructure and whatever. But if the market forces demand that this become a place of density or a small or medium-sized form of density, I mean, I remember these conversations where I was like, but I thought we were really trying to gear everything to 7, and people were like, well, but if the market demands, and so whether that's the market demanding in that area, but there was that discussion where some people were saying,
No, that's absolutely right. One of the risks of allowing that kind of conversation to go unchecked, and honestly, I don't know what kind of referee I should be in these discussions. The point of that kind of discussion was to make it clear to the planning commission that if the market's asking for something over here, they have to come to the planning commission, the county commission through public hearing that's been duly noticed to every one of their neighbors and the rest of the public that they want density over here. So like the discussion we talked about, maybe Browning Ranch wants to put a village node over there. Well, they've got to come and they've got to ask for a change that conflicts with the general plan. So the way that it should happen is they come to the county with a general plan amendment to put a village node over there, and it goes through the public vetting process that the general plan goes through. And then, once it's done, they come and they ask for a form-based village or a street regulating plan, form-based village to be created for that area. Once that's done, they ask for it to be rezoned to that. The point of that conversation was supposed to be, we can adjust as the market demands if we choose to do so, but we still have the control. I think the particular individual who was trying to have the conversation was trying to say, no, we shouldn't have that kind of a iron thumb on
right,
everyone's
hard
rights.
pressed. Yeah, my only concern is that, okay, we don't have measles, but we have pimples now. Like, we maybe don't have them everywhere, but we have still, it's not the open space that the general plan very clearly lays out.
So the open space, okay, it's a good segue to that conversation. The open space that the general plan lays out, the politest way to say it. I don't think it was ever set up to succeed as open space. It was set up to succeed as 1 dwelling unit every 3 acres. And if that's open space, if that's what your definition of open space is.
The general plan, that's not the way I read it. I read it as preserving the integrity of the valley, understanding that people have property rights. And so therefore, let's try to let them have those property rights move to the already existing density points so that the rest of the valley doesn't get.
I agree. That's what it says.
Okay.
In practice, when you're trying to make that happen, you have to create other regulatory restrictions on what is currently allowed.
Yeah, you can't just say, we want this to be open space and leave it at that. You gotta then change the zone or, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So what it also says is in all the areas that are supposed to be open space, if someone comes in to ask for a development, they should cluster that development. Only be allowed to cluster. No 1 unit to 3 acres is what the general plan says. In those open space areas. But if it's in one of those non-open space areas, something close to infrastructure, then, maybe it could still play out at 1 unit to 3 acres.
But as we sort of corresponded before, let's just say out in Liberty or out in Huntsville and those big areas, you take 50-acre piece of land and you're gonna put, just say 5 homes on that or 4 homes, and you're gonna cluster those, that doesn't give the people what they want in
It's
those areas.
pimples.
Homes on that setting need to be big. People need large exterior buildings for whatever. They need room for horses or whatever.
I agree.
And so cluster development, in my opinion, only works in some places, some of the time. And you get out in the more rural settings, and generally it kind of doesn't work
I agree.
unless you want to compromise. And I don't think the market right now, anyway, at least by my eyes, wants to compromise.
Right.
When somebody wants to build a home out on one of those areas, they want
Space.
5,000-6,000 square foot home.
That's right.
They want a good footprint, they want a separate building for their stuff, and they want a little bit of room to mess around. And that doesn't work in a cluster. If you're on an acre, you could still build a 5,000 square foot house, but you can't do that other stuff, or you're gonna be right on top of the next guy
That's right.
doing that same kind of stuff.
So that is what I mean by it, the plan didn't set itself up for success in terms of actually implementing open space.
Hmm.
If we, so let's be in our minds and in theory, not in reality, let's be draconian with the plan, and let's say the plan is now an ordinance. And the ordinance says thou shalt not build anything in any of these green spaces, but you still have the right to transfer your units into village areas. That is something that the county has the right and ability to adopt. We could create those ordinances. You have to create those extra restrictions in order to not allow what the
Mhm.
ordinance is already super permissive on to create. Same subject when it comes to steep slopes and riparian areas and wetlands and all that, is the ordinance doesn't say subtract them. And because of that, the landowner either has a motivation of doing one dwelling unit every 3 acres all over his land, his or her land, or selling, and if we do subtract out those less desirable buildable areas or non-buildable areas, selling it with a haircut, because they're not getting the same amount of development rights they're gonna get out of just creating one unit every 3 acres.
Mhm.
At the time the plan was adopted, the 1 unit there were 2 different thought processes. One thought process was, you know what, the 1 unit every 3 acres actually is probably a good outcome. And let's not incentivize a situation in which we're dealing with the ramifications of not doing 1 unit every 3 acres, but maybe still allowing some things to transfer out so that it's not just 1 unit 3 acres. There's a variety of different sizes with open spaces and all that, but the transfers being in those village areas, and those village areas should be small
Mhm.
because you've got units that are going out onto the open spaces, 1 unit 3 or whatever. And then you have the other side that said, no, let's be very successful and let's clear out the open spaces and let's put them in the villages, and neither side won. Even though we do say that this side won the conversation, this is what should happen, what's actually going to happen, because the ordinances and the practicality of political leadership and the stress and the struggle of changing the ordinance enough to require either one side or the other to prevail, you're going to get somewhere in the middle.
Mhm.
So when the water study, the more recent water study, the water infrastructure study that was just published this last year, when that was conducted, the consultant said, all right, how are you planning for growth in this area? And we told them, we said, village areas and open spaces. And they said, yeah, but that's not what your ordinance allows. And we said, well, that's true. Okay, well, if everything develops like our ordinance allows, then it's going to be the opposite of what the general plan says. Let's maybe plan for 3 scenarios. One is high success for villages with open spaces, medium success, 50%, and low success, everything 1 unit to the acre and very little villages. And that's the outcome. Those are the 3 scenarios that they planned for, which in each of those scenarios, they estimated a final population of the Ogden Valley of 40,000 people. Now, we haven't quite given that estimation of 40,000, but 9,000 dwelling units is what we were looking at. So I don't have the right answer for you guys because it's your community. It's all a policy question. Is the general plan right? Or maybe just 50-50 is right. Or maybe having opportunities and options is right. I would agree on the clusters and those open spaces. If we did what the plan said and forced only cluster subdivisions to be in those open spaces, We're not saving the county any money on infrastructure costs because we still have to have a road going to each one of these pimples. We're not saving the aesthetic of the rural community because we've got 9,000 square foot lot sizes. If they have a sewer system in the area, or half-acre lot sizes clustered in these smaller areas, and the open space that gets associated with these subdivisions. Western Weaver had this way worse than Ogden Valley has it. People don't see that open space as preserved open space. They just think of it as open space because it is open. They don't see it as, there's no big sign that says this area has been preserved from development. And so it just is part of the rural aesthetic without any acknowledgement that it's being saved. And so it's hard to acknowledge that anything good has happened in that case. Anyway,
In terms of your point, sorry, about the 30, like how it's very
Yeah.
specific in the general plan about the
Yeah.
30% grade gets subtracted out.
Yep.
And yet, I mean, we go through this almost every meeting. We talk about the fact that we let people do the aggregate of their property
gross.
and then bring all those rights to one developable section. So how would that work? Because that specifically, I mean, of something that's very general, something very specific that was put in was that they think
Well, it included,
that you should subtract it out.
it was a pretty simple, section 1.2.1. They gave the example slopes over 30 degrees, wetlands and floodplain. So every piece of property, mine included, that's on a river has a floodplain. I couldn't build on that floodplain. It's defined by the Corps of Engineers. Why should I be able to sell that? Development right when I can't do anything with it. So that's all mapped out already. 30% slopes are reasonably easy to figure out. And if somebody still wants to build on it, great, they can build on it. If they can't,
Build in place.
but
But you can't transfer it.
But you shouldn't be able to transfer it, nor a wetland or a floodplain, because those are definitely not buildable.
And I think that that's a real easy sell that, that preserves
No, it's,
the value in terms of, we've got,
that's open space isn't gonna change
no,
either
not that
way.
open space,
Yeah,
but
You're not
in terms of
artificially,
retiring development, right, in terms of trying not to
Right.
have what was the 10,000 more homes or whatever,
Right.
now we've got 985 new homes, instead of, where was I? I'm off, but my numbers is late, but my point is you did retire like 25 homes,
Yeah.
right, 25 lots. And it's 25 lots off the valley.
It's not retired, it's postponed, which is fine.
or it's just made harder to do, and the likelihood of
You
it
can
being
do it.
done is a long time in the future, when maybe some of the infrastructure's problems have been solved or not, and maybe the codes will be different.
And maybe at that time we say, well, never mind, you don't have those rights anymore.
Right, right.
Maybe, yeah.
But,
so
but
that's
that would be that's some of the junk land that's gonna get sold, the rights are gonna get sold quick,
Very first.
Sure.
because why wouldn't you?
Yep,
So
we could do
is
that.
that something we can put in?
The risk in doing that is if someone's got the money and they want to cut up that 30% slope with cuts and fills, which I did see a plan on the Osprey Ranch. I did see a plan that had a couple hundred homes on that hill with roads going
You're
everywhere.
talking an old plan, right?
Yeah, it's not, no, it's not one that's
I'm
coming.
okay with them building on the slope, but I don't want the county to maintain all that crappy road on a hill. I mean, it's hard right now to do it. So if they do go for it, we've got to maintain.
Well, the county wouldn't approve a road with a grade over a certain percent anyway.
That's correct.
So
So
if you could get there without being on a, whatever, what's the high, 8%, 7%?
we allow up to 12, but
Up to 12.
on a residential street, but it can't be for longer than a certain run because fire trucks can't get up it. In my experience, that just leads to this.
Right.
As opposed to this, it'd be better to see something like this if it wasn't dangerous to do.
But we do have to maintain all those roads.
But those would be the last thing, I mean, somebody wouldn't put the money into that if they could do otherwise, I would think.
And we could certainly write this in, because I think you're right. I think building on those are gonna be harder. We may find someone who really can make some money off of it, and so they will do it. Once they put a road that cuts into one or two homes up on the mountainside, there's, not a lot limiting the ability to get the rest of the development rights on the mountainside. As long as we know that that is a potential outcome. And I'm telling you this from experience. I have seen spiral driveways or spiral roads going to lots above a cliff edge. So it's here in the state of
But
Utah.
aren't there ridge line restrictions?
Yeah, well, not on a ridge line, just going up on it.
Yeah.
It was just.
As long as you're off a ridge line
Yeah,
and you can get the road approved for safety and other reasons, maybe it's better there than somewhere else.
very much so. And I'm happy to write those in if you guys want to see them in there.
I do.
Okay, let's take one step back. Banking out. Is everybody on the same page?
Maybe get the other commissioners on a conversation with it, see
Yeah.
how they feel.
Yeah.
At least.
How many are 1, 2, 3, 4? I'm missing 3.
We're missing 3. I'm curious whether or not we have a unanimous majority vote on banking is out.
I say
And,
out.
I say out.
and this, not a formal vote, so
Right.
feel free to change your mind, but
We're seeing that. Wolf Creek, they've got maybe not 200 or however many they want, they're just putting them wherever else.
Mhm.
We're seeing the repercussions of banking already, and it's not legal.
yeah,
What do they call that kind of thing? Because I know Wolf Creek's not the only one, but there's,
just a development agreement that has,
they just have a pot.
Mhm.
Like,
both the resorts have it, the bigger resorts. have
right,
it.
that's what, so it's not,
It's called an entitlement, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, zoning rights are entitlements too. It's kind of a loose thing, but it's just basically, here's your pot and
here's,
draw down
yeah,
from
like
the
a pot
pot.
of it.
It's
Okay.
just, it's hell to track.
Do we even
know they're
real, the ones that they're claiming?
What's that?
Do we even know the ones they're claiming are real?
Yeah, because it's very clearly spelled out in the development agreement, and the locations where they are allowed is clearly spelled
But
out.
our
as well.
new rule is gonna change them to be only inform based.
If they've already got a development agreement, We wouldn't be
they
able
can
to touch
do
it.
But now, from here on out, if this goes through.
any
it's
new,
gonna
yeah,
be-
well, any new development can do whatever they want, as long as you guys have made a recommendation. It could be for denial and the county commission has approved it. So technically, I guess another Wolf Creek could show up without form base. But the whole point is to try and nail it down, so we're doing something a little more standardized across the board and not having to keep track of all these crazy agreements. That's kind of hard. Okay,
If we take it out, we can always put it back in.
yeah, it's written, and hopefully it's written the way that it should be if it is in. Okay, I'll pull it out. I'll see if Western Weaver cares. I don't even know if they're far enough into the thought
But even if they
process.
cared and we,
Split it.
We'll put it in one and not the other.
Yeah.
I'd like to see what the other opinions are too.
Okay, okay, I will, let's see.
When are we gonna actually implement this or vote on this or?
I'm hoping we vote on it in your next meeting, but it doesn't have to be voted on your next meeting.
If we
Well,
do
there's-
vote on this next time, they need to spend some time in this.
That's the thing. if
I
there's
mean,
no-
they have it.
Yeah.
But it makes sense,
and there'll be a public hearing, so
It will
we'll
be here at
hear
that time too.
what the public thinks on a range
The
of
idea.
issues.
So when would you be getting back to us on a number of things that you said? Because you've changed language from what we have.
I'm gonna send what I have out to you guys immediately. I just didn't want to confuse you in this meeting.
No, that's fine. But so if we're actually gonna be asked to vote on it, I want to be able to.
So my minimum time frame is 7 days in advance.
Yeah.
So, and I'll have it ready before then.
So back to TDR for 1 second, what about each TDR coming before this commission, at least initially, until they see how these things work?
Sure.
I mean, it's in here, doesn't seem like a burden because there's not gonna be hundreds of them.
Right. Yeah, sure.
That's my thought.
Well, so, and explain to me how you see that happening, because as I understood it with the form-based, it does not come to us anymore, because it's a straight shot. If it's in the form-based, you get to just buy, sell, do whatever.
That's how it's written.
Right,
We'd
and
have to
so if
rewrite
it's
it.
coming before us and it's form-based, we would
You
have to
would-
approve it, right? It was just an administrative.
You would
item.
just be looking at the checklist of criteria, just like other things, to make sure it's, something isn't marginal or being
Yeah.
presented one way when it's another way or something like that.
So we'll have at least the 3 limitations, slopes, wetland, floodplain in there. But, maybe there's a few more lists of criteria that the planning commission can apply to it.
Well, that it's coming off of.
And I also just think it's good to have these things in the public domain.
Yeah.
So anyone who cares to know what's happening real time and cares to pay attention, they can see and hear just like
What about
what's going on.
floodplains? I know the county restricts a lot of building in floodplains. Does that still count?
So the general plan says don't count it. The county doesn't have a rule that says you can't build in a floodplain. I know our engineers would like to build a rule that says you can't build in a floodplain. It's just a lot easier. Less mess to deal with, but
Isn't this
Boundaries
new?
may be growing this year.
yeah,
Yeah,
we'll see. It's
exactly.
funny
The
because
Corps of
they showed
Engineers
last
has
year.
on the maps, the Corps of Engineers has the floodplain for
They
each
do.
So,
piece of property. Yeah, it's on mine. anyway.
so that's,
The
there's a rub there.
one that's down by,
We could say if
Is it
the
the-
Army Corps shows it as a
the
floodplain,
one that.
or sorry, as a wetland
Isn't that a
or a
floodplain area?
floodplain, then
It's listed.
they have to prove to us that it's not. We could do that. That'll be the easiest way for us to do it.
Okay, I was gonna say, because I know that area.
I want to
floods,
guess,
but
at least in the Western Weaver,
But if you
50%
make that
of what they're
floodplain,
marking as
okay.
wetland isn't wetland.
Sure.
And maybe it was at one point in the past and the farmer just plowed it over and filled it in and it's not anymore. And so,
But is a wetland and a floodplain the exact same thing?
no, they're both shown on the map.
Okay, I see.
Yeah.
And a wetland that's federally.
Yeah.
Regulated, right? And that's-
Right, so if we're using wetlands as a criteria, either we're gonna do the hard part, which is. Someone needs to figure out whether or not that wetland exists, because the Army Corps, they're very liberal with their paintbrush. Or
They just look at Google Earth.
anything that has even a shadow on it, they think is a wetland,
Looks like it might be a wetland.
right? Or we just say, if it's on their map, it's
It
not
would be easier to
allowed.
just go off their map because you start drawing different lines. You're opening the can of worms.
And they make it, they adjusted mine since I've owned the property, they moved it
Yeah. you can't build on
closer to the river once.
Okay, floodplain or
Floodplain.
wetland, okay. Floodplain. And there is a new floodplain map that was supposed to be published last year. There's a few appeals and so FEMA's going through appeal process. So we do have new boundaries. I am curious to see what this year.
The flood, as far as you can still build a floodplain.
You can. 1 foot above base flood elevation. That's the
Yeah.
only restrict, well, I say only restriction, 1 foot above base flood elevation, and you cannot displace water to the extent that it's pushing it on somebody else's property. So if you're,
So still,
well, stilts or you've got somewhere else, so you're building up over here to put your house on it, and then you're carving out over here. Or you're working with another landowner to allow that displacement to
And
happen
are there septic restrictions in there too?
Oh, yeah. In floodplain areas.
And in a lot of the areas that would be in a floodplain are septic.
Yep.
Only.
Yeah, you're right.
places, so.
Okay, so I can come back with that as well. We might not go to a hearing in the next meeting. I've got to really think through how to do this and make sure we got our head wrapped around it.
The other thing. Oh, never mind.
Well, even fault
If
lines.
there's just fault lines, there's
Fault lines are- you can't build on.
pieces of land that don't.
We don't stop people from building. You can't build on the fault line.
You don't know
But-
the rule.
It's only 50 feet. It's actually, and the geologist will say in most cases, that's a safer place to build a home. But
is on the fault line.
yeah, as opposed to further, because the further away,
Okay.
you get
yeah.
both subsidence
That's
and you
all,
get the
yeah,
waves. Anyway,
Interesting.
sorry.
I just was saying, like, if it's not a buildable piece of property because you can't have all the criteria to meet to make it a buildable lot, like it permits for a septic tank. I mean, is that kind of what you're getting at, is stuff like that?
Having objective criteria, right? So at some point, we are asking them to design and engineer. So on the extreme side, design and engineer development on your property to show us you could actually get the lots that you're saying you can get. Now, the reason why the ordinance has been written the way that it has been is because if they can design and engineer all of their lots and put all of the floodplain and wetland and everything else in their back or front yard or side yard where their home can fit on the one spot, then they get all those development rights. And so rather than going through the heartache of prove to us, engineer for us that you can do this, we went to the extreme opposite side that said, well, we're just gonna assume you
Getting
can.
it to you.
Yep. Now, on the engineering side, prove to us you can do this. They're designing an entire subdivision plat, streets, all kinds of stuff.
But at that point,
And
they're
those
going
streets are
ahead.
being removed as well. What's that?
At the point of design and improvement to you,
They're just gonna plat it.
They're gonna build it.
Right, and so there's that extreme side, then there's the more liberal side is what our ordinance currently does, which says. We're not only gonna not make you engineer it, we're gonna assume you're not putting any roads on it, so all of that counts in your favor to sell. And maybe there's a middle ground where it's just, all right, steep slopes. Is it on a map shown as floodplain? Is it on a map shown as wetland?
Could there be a percentage of that that could be taken out for potential, what you would need to service that with roads and stuff?
We used to say 10%. And the 3 acre zone, I did analysis of. I guess probably 50 different subdivision lots. It's actually 2 or 3% served by roads. Just because our 3 acre lot subdivision, 150 feet wide by a certain depth, it's actually quite a bit less than what you would think you would need. Whereas 1 acre, well, that was closer to 9%, and then smaller than 1 acre, we're looking at between 12 and
Even
15%.
if you took, say, 5, 6, 7% out of that equation.
Mhm.
that's-
Well, and we could just do it based off of the zone. We could say in the 3 acre zone, it's 2.5%, which is about the calculation that I calculated. In a 1 acre zone or a half acre zone, it's, higher. We could do that if we wanted to. Sure, we could do all those things.
Thanks for dinner again.
Yes.
You're welcome. We didn't get the chance to talk about the other one, but that's okay. The other one I find is a little bit less important for you guys. If you haven't already read it, shared private lanes, I think is the biggest thing that'll affect you guys. So just take a look at that. I tried to mimic most of the language from private streets that we've already adopted. And for those of you who haven't been on the planning commission for very long, the shared private lanes, we had talked about it a couple of years back. We pulled back on it because there were a couple of things that the general plan suggests we do. For example, this idea of it was a conservation subdivision. If you forfeit some of your development rights, you can have smaller cross sections for these lanes instead. We had 1 or 2 planning commissioners who really didn't like the idea of giving up development rights. And so it's been rewritten to not require any giving of development rights, but also if no one's given up development rights, then that potential development is going to be there, whether it's next year or 50 years from now. And so the ability to get a road through it, a full-size road that's not a shared private lane, we're trying to preserve that ability if it ever is needed. So you'll see that written in there.
This is this little bullet point under work session 1.
Yes. Yeah, we skipped work session 1.
Okay, we did work session. I'm like wondering what we've done. We did work session 2.
What have we done? It's been hours.
Well, because I'm looking at work session 1, I'm like, we didn't talk about that. We didn't talk about that either. What's it? What? We've only done work session 2?
We've only done work session.
Okay, but we did it.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
The Western Weaver will have a public hearing on both of these proposals. The first one, like I said, is far more Western Weaver intensive. I don't see you guys having a big issue with most of what's in there. But once they've done their public hearing next week on both of these items, before we flip it over to the county commission, we'll come to you guys. And if it turns out that you guys still need more time, we'll get something that is only specific to Western Weaver put in place and then try and smooth out the edges.
I still think the general public, the folks in the valley, will continue to struggle with the terminology Western Weaver used in anything pertaining to Ogden Valley. I think
I agree.
I think the education point on that will be difficult. Even though it's, I guess, simple, it's probably not in the minds of most folks.
I know.
And especially people who've come here in the last 10 years who aren't from around here. Who have no idea where Western Weaver is, couldn't care less about Western Weaver, will never go to Western Weaver. To hear that used in conjunction with where they live is awful.
Yeah, I know. And Western Weaver kind of shares the same kind of thing.
So how hard is it to, I mean, you're essentially splitting it up in,
It's unnecessary. I'll tell you why. Off-putting is one thing. The cost of government is another thing. It's unnecessary. There's so many similarities that we could separate the differences just the way that we're doing it. The way to do it is to create a city. Create a city, with its own ordinances, its own government administration, its own tax base. That's the way to do it. Otherwise, the county is gonna need to double its resources to do this if we've got multiple ordinances that we've got to balance.
So if there are just ways to deal with the semantics or the presentation or whatever.
Yeah, I think a lot of
that will
it
make
is
it
how it's
more
listed, yeah, in the, on the agendas, we're gonna try and, like Trevor mentioned, we're gonna adjust the agendas, so. If you read the agenda for tonight's meeting,
Mhm.
I followed Trevor's recommendation to the T. What do you mean?
I just closed it.
I
It
detailed the
says
hell out of that.
Western, Western Weaver, and then as it pertains to August, why don't you just say dealing with the ordinances for blah, blah, blah? I mean, the minute you write, this is about Western Weaver, and then underneath saying as pertains to Ogden, no one gets to that part. They see Western Weaver and they think it doesn't pertain to them. If you just write, form-based ordinances, it has to do with them. This stuff has to do with them.
It's true.
I feel like it's misleading on the agenda. It might not be intentional and it might not be I just feel like it's misleading. The minute you say, we're gonna be discussing Western Weaver's, street regulations. No one in the valley cares about that. As it pertains to Ogden Valley, it's like, oh yeah, what does that mean?
I can't help it if others aren't reading the entire paragraph. If they're looking at the first 4 words.
But if, this is why it does come off like you're trying to mislead, because
Yeah,
why
we're
even write Western, why don't you just simply say discussing the form-based village zone, period, because it is about the valley.
Parts.
Like, we're not voting on Western Weaver's language, we're voting on our language. Now, when it agrees, that's fine, but we're still voting on our language.
Mhm.
When it doesn't agree, we pull it out.
I'll make a motion to close the meeting.
I'll second
Can I
it.
get-
I can just, yeah, I'll second it. I can just talk to
Can I
him.
get a motion to close the meeting?
I think you did,
You got a second?
and I second it.
All right, thanks.
I do feel like the agenda should simply say Ogden Valley.
Can it just say county codes?
No, because the state code requires it to be very specific in certain ways. And what I'm trying to do, hey, thank you guys.
Thanks.
We'll see you guys in a few weeks. So
You're very welcome.
if we don't list why we're doing it, the
Mhm.
question we get is, why are they here?
But it is about us.
It's only about us because Weston Weaver started asking the question.